Chicago's O'Hare Airport, which for some time already has been the world's busiest flying field, is officially dedicated. President Kennedy, in a 3-hour jaunt from Washington, pays tribute to Lieutenant Commander Edward H. O'Hare, the naval aviation hero of World War II, for whom the field is named. 1,000 or more flights come in or out of here each day. Later, a parade through the Loop takes Mr. Kennedy to a civic luncheon. He takes the opportunity to urge Chicagoans to support his $10.3 billion tax cut proposal, without which, he says, the unemployment rate will inevitably keep rising.
All right. Little touch of history there to help for the show.
Wow. I don't think that's the assassination attempt visit, because that was canceled because of which Vince will discuss with us. That was canceled, claiming that Kennedy had a cold. Depending on who you talk to, Vince has a couple of different answers as to what the different excuses were to not show up. This will involve Thomas Arthur Valley and some Cubans and some other things, and a game at Soldier Field. But this is a previous visit where I think Abraham, what the date on it is? March
1963.
Right. So Bolden, I think Vince might have found a photo of Abraham Bolden, the African-American Secret Service agent, who may have been at this visit. We'll talk to Vince in a little while. Vince Palamara coming on, the author of Survivor's Guilt, friend of the show, has a new book out I'm very excited about for the anniversary. This being the 61st anniversary, Eric, of the assassination of JFK, which is a very exciting anniversary, because now I'm going to recommend on today's show something I'm calling the Presidential JFK Files Closure Committee. And this would consist of, and I'll bounce this off of Vince, Jim DiEugenio. This is like the Twitter files. What I'm recommending is these three guys. These three guys, Rex Bradford from Mary Farrell Foundation, Rex Bradford, Dick Russell, who works closely with RFK Jr., who has written about Richard Case Nagel. Vince can lend some insight into Richard Case Nagel. And that he would represent RFK Jr., and then the world-renowned Jim DiEugenio, another friend of the show. I believe, and this I'm going to promote this on Twitter for the next couple of weeks, I believe that these three men could be the equivalent of Barry Weiss and the Schellenberger and what's his face for the Twitter files. Matt Taibbi.
I throw in the lawyer that works with Jim DiEugenio too. He probably.
I can't do that. These are three guys that I vetted myself. I don't know those people. These three I do. I can't recommend someone. He may very well be good, but I don't know him, so I can't recommend him. These three guys: Russell, DiEugenio, and Rex Bradford from the Mary Farrell Foundation, to keep it small, I think might be the Twitter files equivalent for the JFK files. And we'll get into that later with Vince. I want to bring him on because he's got a new book. And I'll just say this, there's a lot of new people, a lot of new revelations in it, a lot of new documents that I've never seen, a lot of names I've never heard of. It's very exciting. It's called The Plot to Kill President Kennedy in Chicago, but it covers a lot more terrain. And
link in the description.
There's a link to the book in the description. Okay, fine. The plot itself, well, Vince will get into it, but there's more to the book than just that. So with that, we could bring in Vince out of Pennsylvania, who's here today out of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Vince Palamara, the legend, the world. This is just my take, the world's leading expert on the Secret Service. And I mean the world, and I don't mean just JFK Secret Service, Vince, any longer.
Thanks a lot. Much appreciate. Great to see you guys. Great to be back. Yeah.
Thanks for coming back, bro. I told you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Back. Thank you. So let me ask you this right out of the gate, because it's so crazy. I think you told me this. I'm sorry about the passing of your mother, who passed away, I guess, a year ago on this coming Friday, Vince. Is that
Of all dates,
Yeah.
November 22nd. Yeah, she, her and my dad, they both got me into this at the age of 12.
Wow.
Big Kennedy fans,
Wow.
and big followers of his life, and were very saddened and touched by his death. And as a preteen, at that time, I collected stamps and coins. I'll make this very short for your audience. What happened was, it was during the House Select Committee era. So I was a 12-year-old impressionable boy, and I was collecting stamps and coins. And foreign stamps and coins would have photos of John F. Kennedy on them, or engravings or whatnot, whatever you want to call it. And they would just regale me stories about his presidency, how much they liked him, talk a little about Camelot and how, like, where they were when he died. It just left an indelible impression to me. So it's ironic and sad. I don't know what the word is, when my mom passed away on November 22nd of last year. But it partly inspired another book that I didn't think I'd ever write.
Thank you for doing another book, because the other books are fantastic. Who's Who in the Secret Service, I think, is one that I have. Survivor's Guilt is another one that I have. And then you'll have another book about the Secret Service. Who's not in the Secret Service, or?
Not So Secret Service.
No, Not So Secret Service. I'm sorry.
And then JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, and Honest Answers about the murder of President
Honest
Kennedy.
Answers. Is Honest Answers your book by itself, or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These are all
right.
my books. This one was on the assassination in general.
Yeah,
like
right.
What we know, what we might never know, and stuff.
That's a really good book as a gift, because it's short and to the point. Little tidbits of factoid information in there, right?
Yeah, I tackled the whole case. It was another case of the COVID lockdown helped.
Yeah, you couldn't get out. You couldn't get out.
So I wrote another book. I didn't think I was going to write a book, and then I thought, I'm done. This is it.
Yeah.
And then it might sound weird to your audience, like, it's sad, but what's your mom's passing have to do anything? And they'll understand, like, when I briefly, unless you want me to tell you right now how it all transpired.
No, I'll just add this. When my mom passed away, I locked myself down and wrote 10 hours of an Oswald miniseries over the course of a year and a half. So I completely get what you're saying. And now we're releasing it in its entirety through AI on unstructured.locals.com, which we'll get into later in the show and on Friday. It's an AI version of the 10 hours of the project called Oswald. And this is now complete. Comes in 5 parts, is 5 2-hour scripts, and it's got Foley and sound effects, and the voices are impeccable, Vince. I strongly recommend it to your audience, because it's something that you would definitely love it, bro. This is 10 hours that you will enjoy.
Sounds intriguing. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've released 4 parts. This is the 5th and final part today. So that's it for Friday, November 22nd will be part 5, and then that's the complete series. So we also have some trading cards of some of your friends, Vince.
Abraham.
You could buy the entire set that we have of some of your older friends that you mentioned in the book. And some guy from Texas who may or may not have been involved. But you could do a whole series just on Secret Service cards, Vince.
Without a doubt.
Okay, I'll just say this one more thing, and then we could talk about the book. This is the biggest oddity, and you had told me this before, that your mother worked in the same nursing home as Matthew Crooks.
Here's what happened. He's from the same. Thomas Matthew Crooks, the one who took the pot shot, almost assassinated future President Trump now. It happened July 13th, and I go into it was by request of the publishers. You guys spend a few pages on the Trump assassination attempt, which I did. And he's from my same hometown. Wow. He lives just a few blocks from me. I could get in the car and it would be less than 5 minutes away. And it turns out my mom was staying at a skilled nursing home, also in Bethel Park. He worked there at the same time. We didn't know him. I didn't know him to see, but like, my God, what a small world, to put it mildly.
He's a modern day Oswald right in your backyard.
This is crazy. And even
crazy.
It's 3 detailed pages of what went wrong with the Trump. In fact, this book's the first book on the Chicago plot. It's also the first book on the Trump assassination attempt. I beat anybody else to do it. So
that's why I mentioned it, because the intro to the book is worth the price of admission, because it goes into detail of, again, the Secret Service failure in the Trump plot. And the analogous information is stunning, how similar the 2 plots are, Vince. That's why, we had discussed this during the summer, but it's in the book, folks. The first intro to the book covers the Trump assassination attempt by Matthew Crooks.
Yeah, something else. But yeah, how it all began was my wife's grandmother passed away in March, okay, of last year. Again, this might sound to your audience, what does this have to do with anything? You'll understand now. I started to get a lot of unsolicited calls from the Florida area.
Oh, right,
And they
right,
weren't likely, they weren't saying robocalls, they weren't saying
right.
political. So I'm like, okay, what is going on here? And I rarely, if ever, pick up. And I rarely, if ever, say it's me, because I'm afraid, you've heard stories about people, they can record your voice and then use it to open up accounts and stuff. So anyway, I said, you know what, I'm going to take a chance. I'm finally going to pick up. This was like sometime like in late April of
Mm.
2023. I said, yes. He goes, this is Vince Palamara. I said, it might be. Who is this? He goes, well, yeah, I just got some information on the Kennedy assassination. My first thought was, okay, here we go again. I get a lot of well-meaning people, but if it's not a daily basis, it's at least a weekly basis on all social media platforms, their pet theory about what happened in Dallas. Not that this is going to be it, and I was almost tempted to hang up when he said, do you know a Secret Service agent named Nemo Ciochina? I stopped in my tracks. What name sounds familiar? I'm thinking to myself, my laptop was open. So, hey, it sounds familiar. And I'm typing the name. I'm like, son of a gun. He worked in the Chicago office. Okay. Then I found out, okay, he was noted by the House Select Committee. They had his address, they had contact information, whatnot. And for your audience, I got to let you know, at the time, his name was not going to be revealed. We'll get to that in a second. And so Nemo himself came on the phone and he sounded like real craggly, like something was wrong with him. And he basically said, you should stop all this looking into Dallas. You got to look at the Chicago trip. You got to look at a man named Lloyd John Wilson and Puerto Rican persons of interest. I'm like, what is this? This is like mind
Mm.
blowing that this guy's
Mm.
contacted me. I've had a couple of Secret Service agents contact me in the past, like Larry Newman, who guarded JFK, but this was like really unusual and it was like hit me all at once. But then he laid down a real bummer. He said, I don't want you to use my name. I don't want to be in it. Don't quote me. I'm like, oh, well, sir, all due respect, then I can't run with it because I'm not into anonymous sources. I want to name names, produce evidence, like Harry Livingstone in Killing the Truth. He devoted a whole chapter and he called it The Source. And we didn't know who the name was, so it killed anything he had to say because, well, who
Right,
is this guy?
right,
What's his bona
right.
fides? Well, it turns out, now this is where it leads to my mom passing away. So all these months, I had all this tantalizing information, couldn't do anything with it. My mom passed away, and then during that late fall, early winter, it's a little morbid, but something I do a couple times a year is I go through all the Secret Service agents that I know who are still alive, and I
Mm.
Google them to see if they passed away. So
Wow.
I went through, yeah, a whole bunch of White House detail agent Kennedy, whatnot, and field officers, and all of a sudden, Nemo Ciochina, why not? He passed away. And all this time, I didn't know he passed away in the summer of 2023. And he released
Wow.
me because he said, when I'm gone, then you can use my information. I was afraid of maybe his family found out, not liking the fact I used his name, this, that, and the other. So I didn't even want to go there with a book. But then the fact that I was free to release, the information coupled with the timing, I was like, you know what? This is definitely worth another book, especially when I found documents related to Lloyd John Wilson. I couldn't believe it. And the thing
Okay,
was,
let me just back up
yeah,
here. Let's
sure.
explain who Wilson is because it's a little
Yeah,
confusing to
that's
people
okay.
at home. These are new people, new players. These are people I've never even heard of. And
Yeah.
Wilson has a lot of different aliases, but we'll just use one of them. Apparently, an orphan, had two step parents. One of them's in jail, the other one's dead. But tell us a little bit about Wilson.
Yeah. Wilson's basically, he kind of sounds like another Thomas Arthur Valley, another Lee
Yeah.
Harvey Oswald, another three named potential assassin. And the thing that's crazy about him is, while, back in FDR to JFK days and up to the present time, when somebody writes a threatening letter, yes, the local field office handles it. And there might be even voluminous reports, but they all deal with just the field office that the person resides at. Like, in other words, if somebody happens in Pittsburgh, it's going to be Pittsburgh only. There's no reason to have Roanoke, Virginia, and Kentucky and everything. Well, this guy generated a tremendous amount of paperwork
It's
for just being a
insane.
lone crazy thing. And it gets even deeper. Keep in mind what Nemo Ciochina said to check this guy out.
Hmm.
Well, it turns out a lot of his colleagues from the Chicago office are filing reports on him. Maurice Martineau, the head of the White House, or head of the Chicago office, he used to be a White House detail agent. Joseph Noonan, Ed Z. Tucker, and then the special agent in charge of the Springfield, Illinois office, and also field offices in San Francisco and Washington State. And it gets even deeper is the fact that Ed Tucker left the White House detail in the summer of '63. All of a sudden, he's found reports on Lloyd John Wilson. Jim Giovanetta was an agent who guarded Kennedy in Hyannisport. He leaves in summer '63. He's generating pre-assassination reports on Lloyd John Wilson. This wasn't like somebody who came out in the Garrison investigation. Oh, Vince, this is some crackpot who probably wants a little fame and fortune. No, a lot of these reports generate before both the Chicago plot and the Kennedy assassination, and it's the agents
and after the assassination.
And after the assassination as well. But the thing that's really intriguing is the fact that not just the volume of reports, who's reporting on Chicago office agents. Well, this guy doesn't even live anywhere near Chicago. Okay. And then you have, it goes, a memo goes to the White House detail dated September 10th, 1963. Okay. Obviously, that's a few months for the assassination and the Chicago plot. Tony Sherman, what does he do when he files a report to Special Agent in charge of the White House detail, Gerald Bain? He leaves in a couple of weeks and he goes to a field office. And what's he do? He's investigating Lloyd John Wilson after the assassination. He goes to Dallas, Texas, and starts to investigate the assassination there. And before you can catch your breath on that, Charlie Kunkel was one of the 15 agents who left in the summer of '63. He also goes to Dallas and starts to investigate the assassination. The bottom line about this guy is that it's just crazy that for somebody who just said something very threatening and vulgar about Kennedy, that I'll meet you one day and if the government doesn't change, I'll destroy you. Yeah, that's pretty bad, but that should just be handled by one local field office. Not all these field offices around the world, they're actively searching for him. And
let's just go back to where he's from. I think it's like San Jose, Vince.
Yeah, he's from
south of San Francisco. So that's why San Francisco is involved later, I imagine. Yeah. Okay, all right.
And that's totally logical. No problem there.
Right. So he's out of San Jose, and he's adopted. His step parents his mother's in jail. The father's dead. He's picked up. He's living out of a hotel. He's picked up for these charges, and he says he's an orphan.
Yeah, and some people have noticed the parallel between him and I think it's Vaughn Marlowe and Dick Russell's book on Richard K. Snegel. There's similarities between him and Vaughn Marlowe, and this Lloyd John Wilson claimed. Now this part is after the fact. He claimed that he offered to give Oswald $1,000. He met him at the Cow Palace, San Francisco, and $1,000 then is worth about $10,000 now to be involved in the assassination of JFK. And obviously, he wanted to assassinate JFK. And the thing that's really bizarre about this whole thing, because so far maybe your audience is thinking, Vince, this is intriguing, but sounds like a crackpot. But he joins the Air Force, passes strict physical and mental exams, and goes to Lackland Air Force Base. And of all dates, November 2nd is when he started, November 2nd, 1963. Well, the investigation winds down after all these tantalizing agents who are leaving details in their investigation, including several Chicago agents, okay? The case becomes cold November 13th. They just basically drop the whole matter. Well, then a month later, Lloyd John Wilson goes to Chicago, goes to the FBI office in Chicago and to the newspapers in Chicago and turns himself in saying he was involved with Lee Harvey Oswald in the assassination of JFK.
Well, let's just back up a second to Lackland out of Texas, right, Vince?
Texas of all things, yeah.
Okay, so he enrolls in the Air Force, or he signs up to the Air Force. He passes the mental and physical exams. He's in the Air Force that year, and somehow he leaves or resigns or something, or he's washed out of the Air Force. Vince, under what conditions does he leave the Air Force?
What's truly bizarre is, just as a brief corollary, is that the Secret Service and the FBI are actively searching for him, writing all these voluminous reports, coming to all these offices. He goes to Texas and joins the Air Force. While all that's going on, you would think that would negate him being able to join the Air Force. Like, hey, the feds want to talk to you. The federal law enforcement agents of the FBI, Secret Service, have a word about you, sir. Yet they pass and they let him in. And then after the fact, this would really debunk some lone nut people on Lloyd John Wilson. They found no psychosis. They had doctors analyze him. They said that he wasn't at least bit psychosis, nothing. Just a little paranoia, but not near. And I also say to people about mental illness is overrated. All the great serial killers were nuts. Yet they were diabolical and able to do all they did. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. So that thing about, he's nuts. Well, you could be, sly as a fox and intelligent and whatnot too, and maybe have a little bit going on. But the bottom line is he was able to join the Air Force, and he is washed out when in December of '63 he contacts the Chicago. I can't stress enough. He goes to Chicago.
Crazy. It's
Why
crazy.
Chicago? And contacts the newspapers there. It's like all the 50 states in the America. He picked Chicago and the newspapers, and you got all these Chicago field office agents and all these members of the White House detail quit the White House detail, which is the coveted position. I mean, you can't get any higher than the White House detail. It's a step down to go to an investigative office, and of all things, these guys are investigating Lloyd John Wilson.
It reminded me, which you cover in the book. It reminds me of Eugene B. Dinkin.
Yes.
Right, Vince? I mean, it reminded me of Dinkin.
Yeah.
I don't know who David Frederick Christensen is. Maybe you can explain him, but we did a whole episode on Dinkin. Eric is hip to him. And that's what this reminded me. A guy running around with his hair on fire, trying to warn people that, like Richard Case Nagel.
And Gary Underhill of the CIA. It's like these guys are these pedigrees.
Oh, Gary Underhill, right.
Who are spotting these things, saying these things. And the thing, again, what makes Lloyd John Wilson so credible in certain respects to me, were really galvanized the fact that several of these reports originate before the assassination. Again, I can't stress this stuff like, oh, this is some crackpot who came out doing the Garrett's investigation years later. No, this is before. And again, the agents and the locations of these reports and the volume of these reports, I can just tell you quite frankly, if this was the crackpot making threats, it wouldn't have went any further than San Jose, California. It would have stayed there. It wouldn't have went to the White House detail. And
Rowley's in the loop on James Rowley, the head of the Secret Service, is in the loop on these things, Vince.
And the special agent in charge of the protective research section in the Monitor threats the president, Robert Bauk, was involved in it, and his two top assistants were involved in it. It's a litany.
Explain the protective research services to people, because what you have done in this book is, this is just my opinion, have begun to explore new guys who were just in protective research division or protective research services, which is now ostensibly the intelligence division of the Secret Service, Vince, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. And I devote a whole chapter to something I touched upon in the first book, but I expound upon it here with photographs and illustrations, that there was covert monitors of intelligence popped up in the Secret Service guarding motorcades in November. Not September, not August. In November, Glenn Bennett, who famously rode in the fob car in Dallas, well, he was there on all the stops in New York, all the stops in Florida and Texas. Okay.
Explain Glenn Bennett to the people, because he is one of the most mysterious characters in your book. I did not know there was that much gravitas behind his role in this. But here's a photo from your book that's Bennett on the right, I believe, and then JFK on JFK on the left. Explain, and there's another photo, extreme right, that Vince has in his book, Color Shot.
Those are from 4 days for Dallas and Tampa.
Right, that's down in Tampa, and then he's somewhere here in
Love
the circle.
Love Field. Yep.
Who is this guy, Vince?
This is what makes this really intriguing, is the fact that he joined the White House detail on a temporary basis November 10th. It's in volume 18. Winston Lawson, the lead advance agent for Dallas, mentions that Glenn Bennett was temporarily assigned to the White House detail. Documents that came out thanks to the ARB recently, actually this 5 years ago, talk about agents who temporarily were assigned to the White House detail. The lone PRS agent, these are intelligence agents who stay in Washington. They don't join motorcades, was Glenn Bennett. And there was two other ones I'll get to in a second. But the bottom line is, when the Haas Select Committee interviewed Glenn Bennett in 1978, he was still an active agent. He rose to be head of the intelligence division, and he was in charge of the JFK files. It's reprinted in the book, the actual transfer of all the Secret Service JFK files and whatnot on the assassination. He lies under oath and says, I wasn't part of the Florida trip. He rode in the follow-up car, Cape Canaveral, Palm Beach, Miami, and Tampa. There's photographs. It's undeniable. It's him. And more importantly, there's even Secret Service shift reports that I reproduce in the book. Yeah, shows he was a big fat liar. Why did he have to lie about his presence? Why didn't he volunteer about New York? Funny enough, newspapers.com several years back, I found an article where his parents were interviewed a few days after the assassination. Says, oh, yeah, our son, he was with President Kennedy in New York, Florida, and Texas. But Glenn Bennett, under oath, when he was interviewed for the staff interview, says, I wasn't on the Florida trip, and mentions nothing about New York. Again, to your audience, why would he have to lie? Why would he have to have a secret attorney sitting next to him. Well, the $64 million question, to answer your question, like get to the point, what's this all about? I think he was a covert monitor of threats to the president. There was mortal threats to the president, Lloyd John Wilson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Secret Service was trying to negate, was trying to stop. In fact, in 2012, Clint Hill in his book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, actually says Glenn Bennett was handling intelligence. I'm like, wow, thank you, Clint. Yeah, because the official story was, oh, Glenn Bennett was just filling in, nothing to see here. But he says he's handling intelligence. Oh, really? And he's there a few feet away, and Kennedy's killed. And the thing is, no one other than maybe Fred Newcomb and Perry Adams briefly was about him too, but nothing ever came of it because their book was unpublished. So I give them a lot of credit for being kind of pioneers on that. But then I found two other PRS agents who were on the Texas trip and the Florida trip, Howard K. Norton and Dale Wunderlich.
Explain who Wunderlich and Norton are.
They're fellow Protective Research Section agents who stay in Washington with their Rolodexes, their file cabinets, their phones. They try to track down people that say things or write things anti-president. They're afraid he is a mortal threat. Like, in other words, Joe Jones wrote a threatening letter from Philadelphia. Let's get the Philadelphia office involved. And I'll start generating reports and calls. And let's make sure we have this guy under surveillance. They don't go on motorcades. Well, all of a sudden now in November, in fact, when I interviewed a whole bunch of agents, and originally it was my first book, but it's in this book as well with some new information, they all said to me basically that, oh, well, yeah, we had intelligence agents. That was only after the assassination they started to do this. And it's like, no, they were there. And again, I think it's because it was, Lee Harvey Oswald, a single guy all alone that day. Give me a break. They were investigating. And I even show, it's like in the third chapter in the book, all these threats and plots to Kennedy, just in 63 alone, all these unknown ones. Newspaper.com was a treasure trove, especially during COVID lockdown. I found so many cities where they were saying a guy wanted to blast Kennedy, and they were waiting for him when he comes out of a tunnel, and he found a bullet hole.
That was in New York, the Lincoln Tunnel in New York, by the way.
Yeah, and they found a bullet hole where Kennedy normally sat in his presidential helicopter. List goes on, but the bottom line about Glenn Bennett, Howard K. Norton, and Dale Wunderlich was they were all Protective Research agents. Now, Howard K. Norton died years ago. I think he died in 1976, and Glenn Bennett, I didn't get a chance to interview him. He died in 1994, unbeknownst to me. But I did get to talk several times to Dale Wunderlich before he passed away around 2011. I spoke to him a few times in 2009, and he was aware of my work online. He knew about it. I was like, oh, yeah, Vince, I've seen your work online. Blah, blah, blah. And he filled me all in about Howard K. Norton. Howard K. Norton was the first Secret Service technician for the agency. He found the resonance cavity was put in the United Nations by the Russians. So this guy was on the Florida and Texas trips, and yet no one knew about it. And how I found out about it was a fluke. In the late 90s, again, thanks to the Assassination Records Review Board, they released the shift reports. And again, not to get on all these tangents, but
no, they're not tangents to us.
Ones that survived the Secret Service shredder. We'll get to that in a second. Well, it just in Art Godfrey's handwriting in the shift reports, it says Norton. Like, okay, I know all these other names that are on the trip. Who the heck is Norton? And that's when I ran it past Dale Wunderlich, and he said, oh, that's Howard K. Norton of PRS. And it turns out it's actually in Professor Fetzer's Murder in Dealey Plaza. I think it's CD 80. It's in the back of the book talking about the washing of the limousine at the White House garage. Howard K. Norton's listed. He was there that night with the presidential limousine. So it actually says Howard Norton of PRS. But the bottom line here, this is smoking gun evidence of trying to monitor threats in progress. In fact, it's all in the book. I have photographs of Glenn Bennett, and I didn't know what he looked like until 2013. What it was only because a former agent book, this is only available to former agents. You can't go in a bookstore, you can't order it. Well, it came available on eBay, and I had a real bad photocopy of it at one time, but from a former agent book, I got the actual bona fide book, and oh my God, there's a caption photo of Glenn Bennett. Then all these light bulbs went on in addition to the photograph.
Which book?
It's called Looking Back and Seeing the Future. It's a 1990 book by Former Agents Association. It's called the AFA USS Association of Former Agents of the U.S. Secret Service. And
you have it in the bibliography in your book.
Yeah, and I also have a photo of Glenn Bennett, the caption photo in question. And like, oh my God, I know the face. And I go to the Tampa photos. There he is besides the limousine.
Wow.
He's on the New York trip. He's at Love Field,
Well,
like
who
crazy.
did you think that was all these years? Just someone you couldn't identify?
Identity unknown. I thought it was a field office agent. The face was familiar. Like, my God. And again, late 1990s, thanks to the ARB, they released the Secret Service shift reports, and we're saying Glenn Bennett's on all these trips. And then when I juxtaposed with the House Select Committee, where Glenn Bennett saying, I wasn't on the Florida trip. I'm like, 15 years later, how could you forget being with Kennedy in Florida? You're still an active agent. You would remember everything. Even if 61 years later, you'd remember you were with Kennedy in Florida, let alone just 15 measly years later. And in fact, he had to have a Secret Service consul, John Meanham, next to him during his questioning. Maybe
right. Let me ask you something. Speaking of Wunderlich, what was his connection to Ruth Paine?
He investigated Ruth Paine. Pretty interesting. Yeah, it's actually in the book. I have an excerpt from a document there. He was there in Fort Worth, physically present in Fort Worth, kind of giving himself away. I'm thinking, Mr. Wunderlich, why are you in Fort Worth? Like he was trying to like underplay their presence, but he kind of realized I was on to him because you yourself, sir, were in Fort Worth. In fact, you generated this report in conjunction with New Orleans, checking on the background of Ruth Paine. Why was he doing that? And again, these are reprinted in the book. It's all in the book. And the connections are scary. So, okay, so we're really tackling Louis John Wilson so far, but in conjunction with that chapter I have on all the prior threats / plots to Kennedy, just in 63 alone, a lot of new information. Then you tag in with Lloyd John Wilson. Then you tie it in with these 3 covert Secret Service monitors of threats to the president who was physically there in motorcades in New York, Florida, and Texas. To me, that is smoking gun evidence.
Smoking gun, but can you also explain the connection between some of these guys who overlap with CIA, Vince?
Yeah.
Some of these guys who are both?
Yes. Yeah.
And how they got to Parkland so fast?
Yeah. Andy,
that's fascinating, bro.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, in volume 18, staring us in the face for decades, and no one noticed it because I literally can tell you, Jim DiEugenio and other seasoned authors and researchers on the education forums at Vince, I never noticed that before. Secret Service agent Andy Berger casually mentions a CIA agent was there at Parkland Hospital and offered his assistance. But Andy Berger is a federal agent who's much aware of what IDs look like. He duly mentions an FBI agent. He duly mentions a doctor friend who came with Vincent Drain, FBI agent. But he singles out a CIA agent was at Parkland Hospital right after that. And then now you have that presence there that no one ever knew about. It's in the book. Jim Mastrovito was a White House detail agent for Kennedy. He leaves the Secret Service and becomes a member of the CIA. But before he did that, he also joined the intelligence division with Glenn Bennett in the 70s. There he is right there.
There's Mike, also known as James Mike.
Mike Mastrovito, James Mastrovito. And the thing crazy about him was he admitted to the Assassination Record Review Board that he had a part of Kennedy's brain. And he destroyed it.
Explain this to the audience, because I found this to be a fascinating revelation. Obviously, in some tiny little bottle, Vince, that he had.
Yeah, James Mastrovito, also known as Mike Mastrovito. He had the files of the Kennedy assassination, just like Glenn Bennett later did, but he started to cull the files. He started to destroy things. He started to get rid of thousands of pages of mental defectives and whatnot he thought that weren't valuable. Robert Blakey and he admitted that Robert Blakey, the House Select Committee, seriously considered legal action against him destroying records when they didn't want him to do that. But he did that on his own volition. Then he had a vial, and he said it was President Kennedy's brain. He destroyed it. He said, the reason I destroyed it because I didn't want to end up on like eBay someday for thousands of dollars. I wanted to destroy that, damn it.
Right. Well, how did he get it? It was passed down from another agent, like an heirloom, Vince.
I think he thought it was. I think it came from where Pierre Fink came from, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. You talk about crucial evidence. It's just like, again, it's mind-boggling. He's working hand in glove with Glenn Bennett in Intelligence Division, and then he has the files as well. He admits to destroying evidence. Robert Blakey was thinking about having legal action against him, and he had this piece of the brain. Dr. Wecht for decades said, the missing brain. Well, he was part of it, and the son of a gun destroys it, admits it. But
Yeah.
there's no, I don't know, the Assassination Record Review Board didn't do anything with it. Maybe it was statute of limitations. It was decades later, just going on anecdotal, him admitting this, And then before we can catch our breath, there's another CIA-connected agent from the tech corner who made his first presidential trip on the Texas trip / Dallas. Well, he was
I
there.
think you froze there. It's Roger Warner. I think.
Yeah, Roger
Eric
Warner
might have a photo of this cat. He was
Yeah.
also dual Secret Service CIA, right?
Yes, and he, there he is. Thank you very much.
He looks sketchy.
Yeah, he does. He looks like kind of James Bondish. And this was, this how I found out he was CIA. Was unique about him was he passed away a few years ago, but he had an open Facebook for years, and it even said,
Wow.
proud member of the United States Secret Service in the years he was in, proud member of the Central Intelligence Agency, blah, blah, blah. It had photos of him arm in arm with former agents at conventions and former CIA officers in Langley, Virginia. So this guy did both. His first presidential trip, and what did he do on the trip? With Winston Lawson, he assigned the motorcade order and the numbers in the windshields. Okay, I was like, this is number 1, this is 3, this is 5. What a heck of a coincidence. He ended up going to the CIA after, just like Jim Mastrovito, just like, and Andy Berger's CIA presence at Parkland Hospital, and the strange
explain
background.
the importance of the order of the vehicles, Vince, to people who may not know in the motorcade.
Yeah, well, it's very crucial because, Kennedy's limousine was open, no bubble top partial or anything, and he's basically got in front. There's a pilot car and there's a lead car, but there was no flatbed trucks in front taking motion pictures, still photos, and even some of those live television feed. And that determined the speed of the motorcade and the presence, as far as like photographs and security and the audience reaction to it. It would have been better to have Kennedy sort of in the middle of the motorcade and have dignitaries in front of him. You don't want it so obvious that he's basically the first car, so to speak. And that's what happened in Dallas. Now, here's the thing. We know the Secret Service, it's in the book, the actual documents they destroyed. William Kelly, researcher William Kelly was a big aid and helped.
Oh, I remember him.
Yeah, all the trips in the late summer and fall were destroyed by the Secret Service in 1995. And what they would have shown was that oftentimes, again, Kennedy would have had agents on or near the rear of the car, would have had many motorcycles. Building rooftops would have been guarded. There would have been many police lined street facing the crowd. In the crowds themselves, there would have been military. And that's what happened. And the documents that did survive, the newspaper articles I was able to find that did survive, and the testimony I was able to get from these guys before they passed away, it's a gold mine. And I always tell people, I think I told you this on your last appearance, Mark and Eric, that the last 5 to 15 years has been a gold mine in the audio-visual department, because for many decades, all you could get for Kennedy motorcades was the inaugural in Dallas, hardly anything in between. But because so many photographers have passed away and so many copyright laws have been kind of relaxed, and a lot of things are in the public domain, things have been remastered, released, whatnot. Like, for example, the JFK Library, all Cecil Stoughton and Robert Knudsen, because they're both dead, all this stuff became public domain.
Oh,
back in
I didn't know that.
In the 90s, I was paying $150 for photos. Now they're all for free. A lot of them are online.
Well, let's just go back to Roger Warner for a second, because if I remember, he was linked to Robert Oswald, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he linked to Robert Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's brother. He interviewed, along with Elmer Moore, Parkland doctors, Texas School Book Depository witnesses, again, Robert Oswald, the Oswald family. So these were the kind of agents that were there on the ground doing the investigative work. And as we know, the Parkland doctors were massaged to change them. Yeah, this is Elmer Moore, the other one who called Kennedy a traitor. It was basically there. And Jack Ruby, it was like Jack Ruby's right-hand man. Said, Mr. Moore might know more than I do.
Oh,
he was talking about his testimony. And he guarded Chief Justice Warren. Well, when Jim Gaukner, who just passed away recently, he was just a young student in 1970, was interviewing Elmer Moore said, yeah, President Kennedy, he was a traitor. It's a shame some things happen, but maybe there's a good result in the end of the day. And he was very, when Jim Gaukner kept on questioning him, Elmer Moore got out his gun, put it on the table, and says, "Who do you work for?" And then when Jim, I don't work for anybody. I'm just a prior researcher. Well, then he calmed down, and when he asked more questions about Abraham Bolden, he said, "Yeah, we got that son of a gun, that N-word. The chief and I, we got that N-word." So the bottom line is, everybody has a tendency of a hero look at the Secret Service. Not all these guys are squeaky clean. Some of them had strange backgrounds. intelligence background.
Moore and Warner were involved in flipping those doctors, right, at Parkland.
And the doctors, they originally said the throat wound was an entrance wound.
They flipped the throat wound, didn't they, Vince?
The throat wound, they tried to get Dr. Perry. In fact, Dr. Perry even admitted that he was, this berated to change his tune, and he tried to compromise. It could have been either one. When he said, I knew an entrance wound from an exit wound. In fact, there's new footage. I have it on my YouTube page, thanks to Alex Harris, who found it originally. And Dr. Malcolm Perry, there's video of him that night, not the famous press conference that's been lost by the Secret Service, or a transcript of it. And Dr. Malcolm Perry is, as a matter of fact, this was the entrance wound. The right rear of his head was gone, right posterior area, he called it. But after being massaged by Elmer Moore and Roger Warner, future Secret CIA agent.
This is at Parkland.
Yeah, and also
didn't they come back with Bethesda autopsy photos, Vince?
To
intimidate, to show the doctors like the phony autopsy photos.
That might be Thomas Kelly. Was it? Arlen Specter of the Warren Commission said Thomas Kelly, the Secret Service, showed him autopsy photos, and that was at a time when they shouldn't have been seeing autopsy photos. And he had the autopsy photos. Oh, really? And Thomas Kelly's doing that. I mean, it's possible that Moore and Warner were doing that, but the bottom line is they got them to change their tunes, to shut up, to equivocate. And they also did the same thing for the Texas School Book Depository witnesses, like was it Charles, Bonnie Ray Williams, and several of the other ones started to change their tune. And
those three were referred to as the three Negroes, not to be derogatory, but those three: Charles Givens, Bonnie Ray Williams, and
Harold Norman. Harold Norman,
the three black dudes. They
then they all started to see. He started to hear shells. How can you hear shells pop on the floor? Give me a break.
They completely flipped those guys.
And
that was.
And like, come on, give me a break. It was like a Hollywood script stuff. But
who was Pierce Allman?
Pierce Allman was a newsman from Dallas who claimed, along with Robert McNeil, interestingly enough, that they both ran into Lee Harvey Oswald when they ran into Book Depository, trying to get to the payphone to phone in their story. Pierce Allman swears it was Oswald. Robert McNeil swears it was Oswald he saw. So that's pretty interesting in and of itself. The fact that Oswald's going out the front door.
The fact that there's so many military intelligence people running around Dealey Plaza, which you expose in the book, a lot of them, which you don't really mention, but you kind of hint at, that they were using Secret Service ID, right, Vince, as to cover them in if they needed to show ID. Weren't those really given to them by the Secret Service to explain whatever they wanted to explain, Vince?
Yeah, Colonel Robert Jones, the Hasla Committee, and Captain James Powell. And they also spoke to the ARB.
And Colonel William Bishop. Let's not forget William Bishop.
Oh, yeah.
What is William Bishop doing there? The Colonel. Well, why is he in Dallas?
Yeah, well, William Bishop, and got to thank author Dick Russell for this in his book, Man Who Knew Too Much.
Yeah.
And Hugh Huggins, also the CIA, got to thank author Bill Sloan for that name. Those two names are mentioned in my book as the possible CIA officers that were at Parkland, because we have Secret Service agent Andy Berger saying a CIA agent was there. Oh, by the way, Gerald Blaine of the Kennedy detail mentions in the sentence a CIA officer was at Parkland Hospital and offered any assistance we could have. Like, but it's buried in the book. People didn't realize that. I reference it in the book as well. So you got two credible sources talking about a CIA officer there. Well, William Bishop and Hugh Huggins claim to have also been at Parkland Hospital. There's CIA background. Well, the Parkland Hospital phone operator says that she spoke to someone who said their name was Hugh Huggins. And
you're talking about the famous Phyllis Bartlett.
That's the one.
Who also received the call from LBJ about Oswald's last rites.
Exactly.
Who then spoke to Charles Crenshaw. So to fill people in at home.
Yeah, because some people were trying to say Charles Crenshaw made that all up, but she came out and said, no. I definitely received a call from President Lyndon Johnson, and I definitely patched it in. And it wasn't like Lyndon Johnson was saying, give me Dr. Crenshaw. He just wanted the operating room. And Crenshaw, who's also been vindicated, not only of all the Parkland doctors who testified about his presence, discovered this back in 1999. Again, in volume 18, it's mentioned in the Price reports. I think it might be Price himself in the medical exhibits talk about Dr. Crenshaw says, oh, please, you're not going to have Oswald in the same operating room as Kennedy, are you? He says, good thinking, Dr. Crenshaw. And he moved to another operating room. But this shows that Crenshaw was there. He wasn't just some Johnny come lately.
Who is Hugh Howell?
Oh, that's Hugh Howe, also known as Hugh Huggins. Yeah,
Hugh
Hugh
Huggins. I'm
Howe.
sorry.
Yeah,
That's why I
that's
was a
okay.
little
No, you're good.
confused.
There was an alias. Yeah, he
Okay, it
was
was an
one of
alias.
two
Right.
CIA agents who claimed they were at Parkland.
Right.
William Bishop, the one you mentioned from Dick Russell's book, Man Who Knew Too Much, in 1976 interviewed, was matter of fact, he was there. He was at Parkland. And this Hugh Huggins, also known as Hugh Howe, claimed in 1993 to author Bill Sloan he was there. Now, whatever your audience thinks it was one or the other, they're both making up. Well, then explain what Andy Berger is saying in a contemporaneous report in volume 18. The CIA officer was there. Explain why Gerald Blaine of the Kennedy detail in his book, matter of fact, this is a CIA agent, was a Parkland Hospital. It's pretty damn fast to get to Parkland Hospital. You know, the lone nut story hasn't even been, etched in stone yet. People don't even know who Oswald was yet.
Yeah, it's
or who did
lightning
it.
quick. Lightning quick. I mean, Colonel
Yeah.
Robert Jones said there might have been 8 to 12 plainclothes military intelligence people in Dealey Plaza, Vince, right?
Exactly. You're
And
exactly
Powell,
right.
I think Powell was one of them taking photos.
Yeah, James Powell. He famously took a photo of the book depository.
Yeah.
And then he got stuck inside, which is convenient. How convenient
Well,
he's actually inside the book
the stuck
depository.
inside, you kind of cover that because what Powell was saying was we were cutting through to go out the back door because of a possible shooter in the railroad yard.
Yes,
that makes
James
sense.
Powell.
That makes sense.
In that Secret Service report that I reproduced in the book, James Powell matter of factly says that they got wind story of a shot from the front from the grass. I'm paraphrasing,
Right,
but it's in there,
right.
and it's a
Well, he says
contemporaneous
railroad
report.
yard, but it is the same idea.
Yes,
That
it's from the
if you know
front.
the physics of the building, what Powell is saying, and others, including Robert McNeil, later of the McNeil-Lair report, who was looking for a payphone, but some people were cutting through to go out the back door to intercept the shooter or shooters.
Yeah, and it's on my YouTube channel. I forget the lady's name right now. It's not really important, but in like 1993, an older woman at the time, I'm sure she's passed away now. It's 31 years later. She called into a phone program and basically said that about the assassination and said that I witnessed something. I've been afraid to say it for years. I'll say it now because all my kids are grown. My grandchildren are grown. I saw someone suspicious that was not Oswald come out of the back of that depository right after the assassination. And this guy, he says I'm paraphrasing. Basically, he reeked of suspicion. He was not a law enforcement officer. It definitely wasn't Oswald. In fact, the description she gave kind of reminded me of some of the people that claimed that they saw people around that time, like two people like Ruby Henderson and some of the other people that claimed they saw Oswald or someone looked just like him run to the Rambler, Roger Craig and whatnot.
Roger Craig,
yeah, and saw two people
but
in the window.
That's in the front, right, Vince? That's in the front of the building. We're talking about the rear, which very few people ever addressed the rear of the building and cutting through the building to get to the rear, which is a parking lot, loading dock, and also the railroad yard.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, and again, all due respect to the single bullet theory and the mechanics of the shooting and who could have done it, and that my focus has always been on these details because these details are the smoking gun that it wasn't this Oswald and a lone nut that day. Again, when you have Secret Service monitors monitoring mortal threats, plural, and plots to the president, and you have these kind of characters, and all this is going on in the short days, weeks, and months before the assassination, and we're supposed to swallow the idea that a man in a building shot and a man in a car, to quote David Lifton, and it was all just a lightning bolt in the sky, it was just fate. I don't buy it for an instant.
I don't buy it for an instant. There are some overlaps in our research. One of them is this guy, Robert Stewart, who I've never heard of before.
Yes.
Explain to the audience, because I am fascinated about the women's building versus the Trade Mart. This has always been one of my ballywicks. And that with Bruno, the advance man, and the John Connolly phony phone call, and that whole thing. Explain who the hell Robert Stewart is.
Robert Stewart was a Dallas office agent. He was for Sorrell's, especially in charge of the Dallas office's direct assistant.
Right.
And I got to thank Linda Zambanini, I think her name is. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. She found a photo of him from like the late 1930s or 1940s, and it's in the book. So we actually have a photo of Robert Stewart. But more importantly, to get to who he was for Sorrell's assistant. Well, I spoke to him in 1993 and I think in 1996, and he was telling me things, and this leads directly to what you're saying, Mark. I'm not getting on the subject. He said, there's so many things I could tell you, Mr. Palamara, but I can't and I won't. What you're afraid is? Yes. There's so many things I could tell you, but I just can't. I'll just tell you. The only thing I'll tell you is that day we were crying out of the trademark. I was waiting for President Kennedy, the trademark. There's so many things I could tell you. Well, what this gets to is Bill Sloan in his 1993 book, Breaking the Silence, that I reproduce in here, the 2 pages. He talks about an unnamed retired Secret Service agent who was telling him basically the same thing. I contacted Bill Sloan in 1993 or 1994, shortly after his book came out, and Bill Sloan confirmed, Vince, you're good. I can tell you that was Robert Stewart. Since you mentioned the name first, I could feel free to tell you that was Robert Stewart. Good detective work that you figured out. You know what, Mr. Sloan, he was using the same language with me. I'm afraid to say anything. It's too dangerous even now. So again, if Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and there's nothing to us, no conspiracy, get a life, why is the assistant Secret Service agent to the head of the Dallas office for Sorrells, in this case, Robert Stewart, afraid to say anything decades later to Bill Sloan and to myself? Now, get to your point about the trademark is, the Secret Service 3 weeks before the assassination was mapping out where's the speech site going to be, which would determine the motorcade route and so on and so forth. Is it going to be the women's building? Is it going to be the trademark? And there was all this back and forth and alleging that Connolly wanted this and Kenny O'Donnell wanted that. And Jerry Bain, when he got Jerry Bain was the head of the White House detail. Yeah. When he got a look of the trademark catwalks, he said, we'll never go there. And he voiced we're not going to the trademark. We're not going. Well, for Sorrells, when he went and he did a survey, he basically, in theory, agreed with Bain. But he said that the women's building would be a lot better to secure. The trademark would not be as good to secure. But the women's building is unsightly, is not as good of a place as the trademark would be, as Jerry Bain there. Well, the High Select Committee, and I repeat this in the book, basically lays it out that it appeared to be an assistant, someone in the Dallas office, not
this has
named
been a mystery
Sorrells,
for years. Yeah, go on.
Was involved in massaging the idea of let's go to the trademark instead of the women's building after all. And the High Select Committee noted that if a subordinate agent in the Dallas office did indeed have this recommendation, they were countermanding a direct order from the special in charge of the White House detail. The White House detail is like this much authority, and the Dallas office is down here.
Yeah.
You always circumvent to the White House detail. The special in charge says we're not going to the trademark. And again, Sorrells in theory agreed, although he thought that the women's building wasn't as nice looking as the trademark. But the bottom line is Robert Stewart is the number one suspect for changing.
Sounds like you got him there, Vince. Sounds like that's been a mystery for decades. Who did this?
And it's also in conjunction. I detail this in the first book. Dallas is a deputy. It was a captain, George Lumpkin, who also was in intelligence,
military intelligence.
He was involved in the motorcade planning, and he's the sole source. When everyone tries to poo-poo why they didn't go to Main to Industrial, they always throw out what Lumpkin said to the High Select Committee. Oh, there are winos and broken pavement. That's why we didn't go to the trademark. The thing is, wherever the president goes, so goes the people. JFK visited the slums of Caracas, Venezuela. JFK visited Harlem, had a motorcade in Harlem. So you mean to tell me a little broken pavement and allegedly winos?
That's crazy.
It was the three trams.
Getting back to Robert Stewart for a second, I believe that Dallas-based Stewart was doing the bidding of John Connolly, because Jerry Bruno in his book Advance Man reports that the guy pushing for the trademark so hard is John Connolly. And he gets on the phone to talk to Kenny O'Donnell in Washington while eating lunch with Bruno, and he fakes the phone call to finalize the trademark. And when Bruno goes back to D.C., he opens up the White House phone logs, and there is no call from Connolly. He faked it.
Yes.
So I think him and Robert Stewart were in cahoots. It's just my opinion now that you're mentioning Stewart. I believe they were in cahoots to direct the thing to the trademark.
And before you can catch your breath on that, which makes Robert Stewart and his saying, telling author Sloan and me that's too dangerous to talk about now. There's so many things I could tell you about, yada, yada, yada. Well, Sorrels I reprint in the book. It was also my last book, but I reprinted in this book. 2 pages of very disturbing information about Forrest Sorrels. A woman contacted the local FBI office right after the assassination that Forrest Sorrels should be removed from his position as head of the Secret Service in Dallas because he's very anti-Kennedy, very anti-government. And she goes on, just regaling this FBI agent who was on the night watch or whatever, these stories. She refused to identify herself and hung up. But the point is, this wasn't years later during the Garrison investigation or during the hospital. This was within days of the assassination. Some woman from Dallas is saying, remove Forrest Sorrels. He's anti-government. There he is.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's crazy about Forrest Sorrels is when the FBI offered their assistance before the assassination with motorcade security, it's reprinted in the book, he didn't want it. He said, "No, we don't need it. We don't need it. We're fine."
Well, just to get back to Roger Warner for 2 seconds, he ends up being in charge of the John Connolly detail.
Yes, yeah, because John Connolly also was the Secretary of the Treasury later on. Yes,
he becomes the boss indirectly of Roger Warner when John Connolly becomes Secretary of the Treasury under Nixon.
Yeah, and then what adds even more to it, all the surviving Kennedy detail agents, like Clint Hill, Ron Pontius, the list goes on of agents who are still actively in the Secret Service. Well, Governor Connolly was their boss at that time.
That's right.
I can't stress this
Dude,
enough.
I never realized that until I saw it in your book. Connolly is the head of the Secret Service.
He's the Secretary of the Treasury.
I never thought of that, Vince. It never crossed my fucking mind.
During the Hot Select Committee.
Who is Louis B. Sims?
We'll get to that one second.
Go ahead.
Just say, Louis B. Sims will tie right into this. These agents were still active agents during the Hot Select Committee, so they weren't going to volunteer too much. They were going to kind of keep close to the vest because it was only 15 years later. Imagine 15 years after 9/11, they're having a government investigation, and the guys still work for the government. They're going to tell you what they want to hear. Louis Sims, who's also pictured in the book, he was a Chicago office agent during the Bolden days. There he is during Watergate. Yes, he was involved in the Watergate mess.
That's why I'm mentioning him.
He talks about Puerto Rican or Cuban suspects on a prior trip that Kennedy made to Chicago. Now tying us into Chicago plot directly. Eric, you started out with great footage of Kennedy's trip March 23rd, 1963. That was the trip right before the canceled Chicago plot trip of November 2nd, 63. Well, during that trip, I'm going to throw a lot of your audience. I know it's in the book.
No, don't watch it over and over again. Don't worry about it.
Former agent George McNally, who went on to head the White House Communication Agency, he was on all the motorcades for Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, I think even part of Nixon. And his book came out. He died in 1970. His widow released it in 1982. It was like a Kinko's where she made hundreds. And Andy Warnar's the last Raw Bookshop and some other rare book people have it. Anyway, make a long story short, in the book, it says about this March 23rd, 1963 trip, and what it says is the police got word during the motorcade of Puerto Rican snipers. Helicopters searched the rooftops and no incidents had occurred. Yeah, and here's 2 of the major suspects of who these Puerto Rican suspects were, and that's from the book Armando Diaz Matas and Julio Flores Medina. Your audience might say, Vince, who are these people? Who are these people? Oh, they just were suspects that were checked out by Abraham Bolden. Yes, it turns out in the ARB in the late 1990s was trying to corroborate or dispute Abraham Bolden. Abraham Bolden was vindicated because the then current late 90s Secret Service pulled up some 1967 vintage investigative reports of the Secret Service. Maurice Martineau was replaced by Lilburn Pat, is a weird name, Lilburn, Lilburn Pat Boggs. He went by Pat Boggs. It was especially in charge of the Chicago office. They were following up on all of Abraham Bolden, what he was doing. Abraham Bolden in late October of 63, November 1st and November 2nd, and up to including assassination, was investigating threats to Kennedy in Chicago and what he thought maybe were threats to him afterwards too, Dallas and whatnot. Well, those were names. Yeah, there he is in the hat. Right there. There's Abraham Bolden. That's March 23rd, 1963. And there's Mayor Daley, there's JFK, and the agent on the far left is Art Godfrey, one of the shift leaders of the White House detail. Well, Abraham Bolden's been totally vindicated, but the sad thing is those documents didn't come out until 2017 during the Trump document dump and made all the news about all those thousands of documents that came out, but no one cared about them because only somebody like me would care about the Secret Service reports. Everyone's too focused on James Angleton and the mafia, which is important. But I was like, okay, who are these Puerto Rican names? Who are these people? Those names you pulled up, those two pictures, if you want to pull those up again, there's two Puerto Rican guys. Well, they did time in federal prison.
That's right.
For trying to assassinate U.S. congressmen in 1954. They were armed with pistols. Yeah, those two and several of their compadres in 1954 went to the U.S. Capitol. Yeah, in Congress.
Yeah, we did it. We did an episode on them, and the common denominator for you, as you know, Vince, is Emory Roberts.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah.
Tell him what he's won, Eric. Emory Roberts is the connection, Vince, right?
Well, yeah, because Emory Roberts, he was part of the detail. November 1st, 1950, two Puerto Rican nationalists, a conspiracy, two Puerto Rican nationalists tried to kill Truman. Emory Roberts was on the detail along with Stu Stott and Floyd Boring, a few others that ended up protecting Kennedy.
Floyd Boring.
Yeah. And Emory Roberts obviously was there in Dallas. He was in the fob car. He ordered the agents not to move, and he recalled an agent Love Field and whatnot. He was one of the investigating officers. There he is right there. Lifted Johnson as soon as Kennedy was shot. Kennedy wasn't even declared dead yet, and he ended up becoming appointment secretary. It's in the book again. I've had this in a couple of my other books. It's too good to pass up that he became LBJ's right-hand man and his appointment secretary. He effectively replaced Dave Powers, took over Dave Powers' desk. It's in the book. Articles where people were wondering, yeah, there he is with consulting with LBJ. People were wondering, why is this still active Secret Service agent taking over the duties he used to be Dave Powers for President Kennedy? What is he doing agreeing to Japanese Prime Minister Makaido? What's he doing all these duties for? And I talked to another agent who was an agent during the Obama Bush era, and he said he was flabbergasted. Vince, do you realize that an agent is supposed to be apolitical? You're not an active agent and still working for the government, like working for the political party in office. He said, to his knowledge, that's never happened before or since, that an active agent was actively working for the sitting president. At that time, he switched to Johnson. Johnson becomes president. When Johnson left the White House, well, one of the last things he did was he gave a little goodbye to the Secret Service, and he said, "Oh, Emory Roberts couldn't be here today. He says good morning to me every morning and says goodbye to me every night." So she named
But he couldn't be there for the award, if I remember.
Yeah, he couldn't be there for the award. There's grainy film. I have a video of it on the YouTube channel.
Wow.
But yeah, it's just crazy, all these connections. Oh, and then the grandson of Emory Roberts ended up working for George W. Bush. So
well, didn't Sims infiltrate the Nixon White House to change the audio tapes on the secret tape recordings?
Yes. So you had Louis Sims. Louis Sims was interviewed by the House Select Committee about the Chicago plot, and talks about there was either Puerto Rican or Cuban suspects on the prior trip. The trip that I just mentioned, it was Puerto Rican snipers, March 23rd. This former agent, George McNally, as a matter of fact, he said police got wind of Puerto Rican snipers. So I'm being facetious here. Two Puerto Rican Lee Harvey Oswalds were trying to kill Kennedy in Chicago. Nothing to it. Nothing to see here when he's blown away November 22nd. Nah, it's just a coincidence, Vince. Nothing to it. But Louis Sims ends up embroiled in the Watergate mess because he was involved in. Yeah, he was involved. There he is. He's involved in the audio, obviously the famous Watergate tapes themselves. A little chicanery there. Al Wong was another Secret Service.
Al Wong was also an infiltrator.
And James Riley was still chief of the Secret Service until he was let go in 1973. He was replaced by a vice president LBJ agent by the name of H. Stewart Knight. There was still a lot of active Kennedy agents who were guarding Nixon, like Bill Duncan. Rufus Youngblood, who he was let go in 1971.
Yeah, what happened to Rufus Youngblood? Did he transfer?
He was let go by Haldeman and Ehrlichman. Haldeman and Ehrlichman hated his guts because he was an LBJ agent, so they tried to get him out of there. They didn't want anybody close. They got rid of Lem Johns that way. Lem Johns was still an agent in the Nixon era. They got rid of him. There they are. That's Jerry Kivett, and that's the balding guy is Rufus Youngblood. That's in Australia, and they threw paint.
That didn't go well for Youngblood, did it?
No. Look at that. Look at that on the back of the car here. Yeah. So the bottom line is, back to one thing we should say before, Mark and Eric, about 5 to 15 years ago, this gold mine of all these photos and films being released is now we can compare and contrast all the motorcades President Kennedy is. I have virtually everything of President Kennedy, any motorcade he was on, foreign or domestic, and it's scary how many times building rooftops are guarded. It's even snuck in some photos. You can see the police on the rooftops, and we have the newspaper articles that are matter of factly saying that you know, the police chief said we have to guard all the building rooftops of the president and his party pass. You know, the motorcades themselves, all the phalanx of motorcycles and agents on the back of the car. Yeah, there you go. That's Pittsburgh, PA. And the official Getty images says with sharpshooters on rooftops. This is Kennedy's motorcade passes, and there they are. That's the 3 arrows right there. Why didn't he do this in Dallas? Why? They had the resources, and yeah, there you are in Paris. 10,000 policemen, Republican, were on duty on rooftops, and there they are in the Getty images right there where we can see, there they are right there. That's how presidents survived prior motorcades. They weren't always in the back of the car. They didn't always have the bubble top. But what they did do is they had this above coverage that would have, if you believed Oswald acted alone, well, they would have negated that. And he kind of
like Butler Farm Show, you mean?
What was it?
Like Butler Farm Show, where there was somebody not on a roof.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. And then you got July 13th. You had the counter sniper team on a slope roof, and yet you had Thomas Matthew Crooks on the other slope roof. It's just in my, but I tell you
and
what,
the White House itself, which is a slope roof, Vince. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
Let me ask you something. Tell me about it, and I knew about this beforehand, but tell me about Chief James Rowley writing for Reader's Digest about how easy it is to assassinate President Kennedy with a high-powered rifle a week or two before the assassination.
Yeah,
and then
he writes an article talking about, to his credit, I guess, he talks about how building rooftops are guarded. He's another one in the litany of pre-assassination. It's in 2 major books before the assassination, talks about building rooftops are guarded, and they're written by the help of the Secret Service. What James Rowley talks about, we have men posted everywhere, including in crowds. We have we have Secret Service, we have police, we have military who augment us on trips. And, like what Chief Bauman said, his predecessor in his book, Secret Service Chief, he talks about if anybody would be so foolhardy to try to shoot a president from a rooftop, that we would have, the police or the Secret Service to make sure that person never lived to try to pull another trigger and all these things. And Abraham Bolden claims that he went to D.C. before he was picked up on phony charges. And one of the things he said was, why are we revealing this stuff? Why was
that's
on
bizarre.
detail? Was security so lax? And he's been vindicated on so many fronts. One of the things he claimed in his book in 2008, and he mentioned this back in 1993, he mentioned the Secret Service agent by the name of Harvey Henderson was his boss. Harvey Henderson was a racist agent from Mississippi. He used the N-word frequently and denigrated Abraham Bolden tremendously, really running him down, used a lot of racist epithets. Well, some of the Secret Service agents I spoke to tried to cover for him and said, Harvey Henderson wasn't even part of Bolden's shift. It turns out those same late 1990s documents that came out shows Harvey Henderson, temporary shift leader. And who are the agents underneath him? Abraham Bolden's one of them. So he's been totally vindicated. But yet people like Gerald Blaine try to come out and say that Abraham Bolden, there's no truth. Harvey Henderson wasn't even on his shift. But the point being is, you had this kind of situation where you had agents who were having sex parties, who were, trafficking women, alcohol, lax. They didn't like Kennedy for his womanizing.
It sounds like Venezuela during the Obama years.
Yes.
Right, Vince?
Yeah. Well, Cartagena, Colombia, but you're right.
Colombia, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. You're close. Yeah, 9 agents drank the night before the Kennedy assassinations.
Right.
9 agents drank
again,
in 2012.
9.
Yeah, exactly. It really is rich. I have it on my YouTube channel. Clint Hill came out in 2012. Mad as hell at those agents. 9 agents were there drinking. What were they thinking? They weren't thinking. I said, Clint, someone's going to call in and say, Clint, you were one of the 9 agents that drank the night before the assassination. At least these guys didn't lose a president. But it went right over Brian Lamb, the CEO of C-SPAN's head, because they didn't realize that, oh my God, Clint Hill was one of the agents that drank that before, and the ramifications for his drinking was a lot worse.
Didn't the Earl Warren say to James Rowley, obviously these men have been fired, and Rowley famously said during the Warren Commission that they have suffered enough?
Yes, yeah.
Regarding the drinking in the cellar, Vince.
You're exactly right. Yeah, it was probably Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren's finest hour. He grilled Chief Rowley during his time. Volume 4.
Yep.
And Chief Rowley goes, I don't think they could have prevented the assassination, which is jaw drop. Then he also says, I didn't want to punish the men because I didn't want to stigmatize them. Exactly. See, and the reason why they got away with this, This was 1963 to 64. It's a very naive country. It's before there's Harvey Henderson standing right next to Roy Kellerman. There he is.
Wow.
And it's from the book. And it was a very naive country. Like my parents always tell me, Vin, 10 people could have killed Kennedy that day. All your details you're throwing at me at the time when one year out the other, we were so devastated. And at the time, the Secret Service had a hero image, kind of like the FBI G-men, of the 30s and that. So in today's climate, they would have been fired, stripped of pension, maybe even criminal time, civil suits.
You mean like all the Secret Service agents who were fired after Butler?
Oh, wait a minute.
Wait a minute, Hunley. There was zero.
All right, point well taken. Yeah, you're
okay.
right.
No, the guy, the main guy, operations guy, he's promoted. He's now acting director. That's how it works.
All right, well, yeah, you got me on that one. I'm thinking more about Cartagena.
I mean, she was removed.
Oh, yeah, the director, just like the director. The woman director 10 years before where the guy got it over the White House fence, she also fell on her sword and resigned.
Right, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So the two female directors didn't work out too well, did they? But that's another story.
But getting back to Louis Sims for a second, I just want to mention about him attending both Bolden trials, and then also the African-American agent who was supposedly just a symbol at the prosecution desk to show that it wasn't racial, Vince.
Yes, and he about Charlie Gittins. Abraham Bolden was the first African American agent of the White House detail. Charlie Gittins was the first African American agent of the Secret Service. So Abraham Bolden was like the second agent overall, but he was the number one agent that made the White House detail. Charlie Gittins never made the White House detail, although he did guard JFK and Hyannis.
I believe Bolden meets JFK in the men's room following that photograph that you showed in Chicago right there.
Yeah, he did. He met him outside the men's room in 1960. He says, "Do you want to be the Jackie Robinson of the Secret Service? Hey, we'll come in," because he had the first. Because JFK, it was Andy Hatcher, the first African American member of the press corps. He was Pierre Salinger's assistant. So JFK did a lot for civil rights.
Was he the first state trooper in Illinois? Also,
yes, first African American state trooper. Briefly a member of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Then he joined the Secret Service.
Right.
Secret Service. And think about Abraham Bolden. He briefly guarded Eisenhower as a member of the field office, then as a member of the White House detail JFK, and he guarded JFK between 61 and 63 whenever Kennedy went to Chicago. And these documents I reproduced in the book shows the March 23rd, 63, and Bolden's name is mentioned several times guarding, Kennedy near the podium, this, that, and the other. He's working in conjunction with the White House detail. So it wasn't just like, it was a 30-day trial. Abraham Bolden decided not to join. It wasn't like the agent said, he's not worthy, we don't want him. After 30 days, he could have decided whether he wanted to stay. And after the racial bigotry he received from Harvey Henderson and his fellow agents, and the lax security and the things they were saying about Kennedy and civil rights. And as we know, famously, 4 agents came out in the late 1990s and denigrated Kennedy for his private life. One of them was Tim McIntyre, wrote the follow-up cards on ABC TV.
Well, just back up for a second, because he claims and Rowley denies that Bolden ever went to him with these complaints. If you might address that for a second.
Yeah, well, it could be a little play on words. Yeah, I think is that Charlie Gittins there?
Yeah, that's Charlie Gittins.
That's Charlie Gittins, yeah. Well, anyway, there was 2 Secret Service chiefs. The Secret Service chief at the time would have been Huey Bauman. Back in June of 61, when Abraham Bolden had his 30-day temporary assignment, Huey Bauman was the chief. So I think what happened was Raleigh, when he testified to the Warren Commission, said this agent, which they don't name, it's Bolden, says that he never came to me about anything. Either that's true or it's false, or even if it's true, I think that what it was, Bolden went to the then chief, Huey Bauman, and addressed all his concerns. And that's when Bauman said, you're new around here. You don't know about these things. And so it could very well have been Bauman instead of Raleigh. So it could give Raleigh an out that he wasn't lying per se. In fact, Bolden didn't know till years later when I told him, did you realize they talk about you during the Warren Commission testimony?
He didn't know about that?
Yeah, I sent him photocopies of Volume 4, Chief Raleigh, and they're talking all about the first agent who was ever arrested for counterfeiting, this and that. And everything gets so ridiculous about that.
Well, let's get into the counterfeiting now. Let's get into what he was charged with for a second here, so we can explain this frame up, so to speak.
With pleasure, I'll do it. What it boils down to is that Abraham Bolden won accommodations for busting counterfeiting rings. Okay. He was married with, I think, 3 children. Yeah, 3 children at the time and everything. He was a decorated Illinois State Trooper, Pinkerton Detective Agency, and he was the first African-American agent of the White House detail. Someone of his stature. I mean, even Ted Sorensen even knew who he was. People like that. He's not going to come out and ruin his life, his family's life, his career, his reputation by, ooh, I'm going to money grub. I'm going to take a little money from a guy that I'm investigating for counterfeiting. Give me a break. And here's the thing. During the trial, one of the guys that accused Abraham Bolden of doing this, of the little framework, admitted that, yeah, I was told by the Assistant Attorney General of Chicago to basically make this all up. And then the attorney.
What is that? You're talking, of course, about Spagnolia, who is committed perjury,
yes,
who was a mobster involved in counterfeiting in Chicago, who later admitted that he lied on behalf of the prosecution. Go on.
Exactly. Hanrahan was the attorney, and he took the Fifth Amendment a la Mark Furman. He didn't want to say anything to tend to incriminate him, and that's where the matter rested. Again, this was 64 to 66, more naive time. People didn't question things at the time, but it sure reeks of a frame-up because, again, these were the very men that Bolden was trying to put away, and he actually did convict him previously for a counterfeiting situation.
Well, there were 2 trials. Yeah.
First one a hung jury.
The first one was a hung jury. He had the same judge in the second trial.
And what did the judge do? You know about this? Judge said, in my opinion, he's guilty on all charges, and totally tainted the jury.
Did they take him to Missouri to the psychiatric? Okay, I forgot about that.
And guess who else was at that same? You know about this, right? Richard Case Nagel was there. Guess who else was there?
I'll tell you another guy who was
Wilson.
there. I'll tell you another guy who was there. General Edwin A. Walker was taken there by Robert Kennedy out of Oxford, Mississippi, and given the multiphasic personality test. Do you eat your own feces? And on and on and on. Walker was in there. Everybody who was a political prisoner ended up in that Missouri psychiatric hospital.
Yeah, Lloyd John Wilson, Bolden, General Walker, and it's all with the ability to taint someone. So now you got someone who's ex-convict, and wasn't the guy a mental case? They put him in the federal penitentiary.
Well, he has a spiritual awakening in there. Bolden, if you read his book, this is where he comes to terms with the Lord and Jesus Christ and becomes a spiritual person. Not to poo-poo that, but it's in his memoir.
Well, yeah, not only that, but the bottom line is the Assassination Review Board did tremendous service because that late 1990s era Secret Service was told to go find anything on Bolden you can, and they found a gold mine. It was only released in 2017, and again, it was ignored by the research community. It took little old me, because I have an interest in Secret Service, was wondering about these Puerto Rican names, and I'm like, oh my God. These names he's checking out are guys.
It's the same guys. It's the
same guys who were trying to assassinate.
Okay, but what happened to the 4 Cubans? Are these the Puerto Ricans, Vince?
I think
that's my confusion.
It's possible. Here's why. If you think about Lewis Sims, the first thing since the hospital committee, the suspects were either Puerto Rican or Cuban. It could have been one or the other. It could have been they confused Puerto Ricans with Cubans and vice versa.
Well, the landlady saw the weapons on the bed.
Yes,
if I remember correctly, and
it was 4 shooters and what 2 escaped surveillance.
2 escaped surveillance, but she identified them as Cubans. The first I've ever heard of Puerto Ricans is in your book.
Yeah, and it's also Lewis Sims. That's how select committee testimony says Puerto Ricans or Cubans. But no, fair enough, because most people didn't even ignore that or didn't recognize what that all meant. Then in conjunction with former agent George McNally, matter of fact, talking about that March 23rd trip where he talks about Puerto Rican snipers. They got word of Puerto Rican snipers during Kennedy motorcade. You tie that all together, it tells me that Abraham Bolden was a heck of an investigative agent.
Yeah.
He was searching for mortal threats, and that's why the trip was canceled. Pierre Salinger's on record saying originally that Kennedy did not cancel his Chicago trip because the Vietnamese president and his brother were killed the day before. The CIA back news.
The DM brothers you're referring to. Go on.
But that's what he said in 1975 with Edwin Black, that Chicago Independent article. But in 1978, Pierre Salinger then kind of changed his tune and made it seem like it was because of the Vietnamese, the death of the president and his brother. But then when I interviewed Secret Service agents about the trip, One told me, "Oh, the president had a cold."
Oh, they had used that before.
That's the same phony alibi the year
Yeah.
before, also in Chicago for the Cuban Missile Crisis. He
Yeah.
was there the year before in Chicago. He canceled the trip, and Pierre Sandra looks at Kennedy and says, "Mr. President, you don't have a cold as well. I'll tell you when we get back to Washington." And a year later, his agents trying to claim, "Oh, that's the reason why." And other agents I spoke to had no idea. They were baffled why the trip was canceled. They didn't know. He says, we went ahead with the security as if he was still going to be there. So the whole thing's strange. And as we know, Thomas Arthur Valley, name I haven't really talked about yet, he's pictured in the book. And I basically go over ground that James Douglas and other officers have said about him, that basically I think he definitely could have and was the patsy.
I mean, the similarities to Oswald, the Japanese air base. I mean, it wasn't Atsugi, but I mean, the comparisons are insane. How similar he is to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Vince. And he's interviewed in 1975 in a broken down trailer. And the first thing he says to Evan Black was, "Oh, Soldiers Field, the plot to kill President Kennedy." And it turned out he admitted to training anti-Castro Cubans.
Right.
This guy,
I mean, he was tied into David Ferry. I mean, this guy's got so many fingerprints of intelligence on him. It's scary.
Yeah, and there's even more details. This lady who was kind of like a gossip hound, who had a column in the 50s and 60s, came out and said her sources told, this was right after the assassination, the plot to kill President Kennedy originated in Chicago and whatnot. And it's like, whoa. So she's saying it originates from Chicago. And Ruth Payne is quoted as, "We know some people in Chicago are willing to help Marina out." And you obviously know about the famous thing. It was in the Oliver Stone documentary I mentioned briefly in the book about an informant with the name Lee, no last name, is alleged to have been involved in all this as far as with Thomas Arthur Valley and scuttling the Chicago plot. And the turn that Kennedy was going to make in Chicago was eerily similar to the dogleg turn in Elm Street, Dealey Plaza. Yeah. And as we know, the Floridian Hotel in Tampa 4 days before assassination, that looked like the Texas School Depository stretched out. It looks exactly the same building, just stretched out, that he would have been.
Well, I mean, Rowley famously says to Inspector Kelly, "How come we didn't have a man on Miltier?" Remember, I mean, it is bizarre when he says we didn't have the manpower, but that goes to your theory that they were stripping away Secret Service manpower the whole year.
It's very disturbing. On the one hand, you have a lot of honorable agents, but then you have these agents who harbored ill feelings towards Kennedy for his private life, civil rights, Vietnam, Cuba, etc. Then you have a lot of times they did a tremendous job protecting the president, 61 to 63, and there's ample evidence of it. Like, again, you go to my YouTube channel, it's a 2-hour plus video of all the motorcade footage I was able to find the last 5
right.
to 15
but
years.
I'm saying you made the case that they stripped away guys the whole year, that all those people who retired. That's what I'm talking about, because that's similar to the Trump case now. The lack of manpower, other departments loaning out people.
I hear you.
It has echoes of today, bro.
Yeah, you're talking about what Gerald Blaine talks about in the Kennedy Detail book, where like they had roughly 15 agents who decided to retire and leave the coveted White House detail. They couldn't take the stress, blah, blah, blah. The real reason is I think they were monitoring threats to the president. They left the detail because they had assignments to go to this office and investigate Lloyd John Wilson and other threats. And that's the reason why they left, because you don't leave the White House detail until you retire. Or maybe at the very end, you go to a field office in your local area to kind of like be washed out and into retirement. You're in your late 50s, it's time to go. These guys were all in their 20s, early 30s tops, and they're leaving the detail to go to investigate counterfeiters. And you look at the files, these guys, oh my God, they're investigating Lloyd John Wilson. They're investigating other threats. Why are they doing this? And why are they doing this all in the summer and fall of 63? And then we have the Chicago plot. We have these Secret Service monitors of threats to the president's life. And then we have Oswald, who's all successful a few days later in Dallas. Nothing to it. But then down on the ground there on the same, few feet away is Glenn Bennett, who lies last to the committee. I wasn't on the Florida trip, doesn't mention he was also on the New York trip. And this whole thing is just crazy. But again, it took years for this stuff to come out. It wasn't like, this stuff we knew about for years, Vince. People didn't know. In fact, let me say this. A lot of people knew about Glenn Bennett because he famously said he saw the shot hit the president. But they They thought he was a Secret Service agent, nothing more, nothing less. They didn't know he was an intelligence agent. And what the heck is he doing there? He should have been back in Washington, and the rest is history. And then when these agents are telling me, and they were real defensive back in, about 10 years ago when I was interviewing them, I don't know what he was there for. He was a kind of strange dude. I don't know what he was there for, Vince. And the crazy thing you didn't get to, Mark, yet is what Gerald O'Rourke told me. It starts out the one chapter in Glenn Bennett. Gerald O'Rourke was on the Texas trip. He believed there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, and he was a very friendly guy. Back in like 2004, 2005, I spoke to him several times and emailed him. Well, one time I sent him a letter about Glenn Bennett, which he did not answer, which was weird. He answered everything else.
That's weird.
I phoned Glenn Bennett to Gerald O'Rourke. Hey, Jerry, guys, I called him Jerry. He was real friendly. Said, I want to ask you follow up about my inquiries about Glenn Bennett. And he goes, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm afraid for my agency. And he
my God.
That's an exact quote.
Wow.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm afraid for my agency. Yet he was real open. There was a conspiracy. He had no problem admitting there was a conspiracy. He had no problem admitting they should have drank the night before. But Glenn Bennett was such a hot topic. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm afraid for my agency. He sent this to me in 2005, all those years later. Again, if there's nothing to this, why is this guy saying this? Why is he lying through his teeth and saying, oh, Vince, you're barking up the wrong tree, son. This is just a normal agent there. You're making more out of this than it needs to be. Instead, he says something like that. He hangs up when he was previously so friendly and forthcoming.
Let me ask something. Why are Mike Howard and Charles Kunkel threatening Marina Oswald? Like, what job? Why is the Secret Service involved in this? In your humble opinion, Vince?
Yeah, well,
like, what's it to them?
What's it to them is they were afraid of losing their positions, the agency themselves, their pensions, Lord knows what else. They had a reputation to protect. You got to keep in mind, the Secret Service is a protective agency.
Right. I thought the FBI had done this intimidation stuff. What you point out that it's Kunkel and Howard.
Yeah, what they were afraid of.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, what they did is they basically, took captive this, is it the Inn of the Six Flags or something?
Six Flags, yeah, down by Fort Worth.
And it basically kept her prisoner, and it basically switched things around. And Howard Norton, or no, I'm sorry, Mike Howard.
Mike Howard's
confused. Mike Howard and Charlie Kunkel was one of the agents, by the way, left the White House detail to join the Dallas office before the assassination. Anyway, these two guys are grilling Marina, keeping her under surveillance, keeping her under wraps. Well, Mike Howard becomes one of the biggest proponents of the low nut theory, to the point where he invented, him and his brother Pat was a Dallas sheriff. They invented this story that a Negro janitor saw Oswald pull the trigger.
Yes.
And it turned out to be total bunk. Mark Lane's one of the people who debunked it. It's been totally debunked. But Mike Howard and his sheriff brother Pat made up the story. And then decades later, about 8 to 10 years later, I think it was for the 2013 50th anniversary, Mike Howard, still kicking, he's in his 80s now, Mike Howard came out with this cock and bull story about Oswald's little green book. And Oswald's little green book, there was a dagger that Oswald drew and had Nixon, Kennedy, and Connolly, but the page was ripped out, he says. But I saw that page, Mike Howard said. I saw it before it was ripped out.
Sure you did, buddy.
See that? But what he did, just like the Negro story, the Negro agent, or I'm sorry, the Negro janitor, it was total bull. Decades later, he was trying to pin it on Oswald again by this phony story about a green book, a little green book that Oswald had in his handwriting.
Green book, and how about the redheaded Negro in Havana? I mean, it becomes later on. Let me ask something. Yeah. Where was Harvey Henderson November 22nd, Vince?
Yeah, Abraham Bolden, he says he would have the temperament. If anybody would have been the mysterious agent of repute on the grass, for years, people have known about the agent of mysterious repute on the grassy knoll in and around Dealey Plaza. That Joe Marshall Smith and other people ran into men claimed to be Secret Service, even showing credentials. Joe Marshall Smith, the Dallas police said, "I've seen his credentials before; they were good enough for me." But then later on, it didn't ring true, and the Secret Service came out and said there were no Secret Service agents stationed there. For years, people said, "Well, these CIA boogeymen or assassins." My thing is, could it have been real agents, and they didn't want to admit their presence there because it would look like they screwed up even more security-wise, or they were there for nefarious reasons. Well,
okay. Just to stop you for a second, you've got military intelligence roaming around, according to Jones. You've got your protective service agents that you've outed, and then you've got these CIA agents you've outed, all of them with credentials. So it looks like there's 20 different people with credentials.
And Mark, to answer your question directly about Harvey Henderson, good points. Abraham Bolden directly told me in 1993, if anyone would have been the agent on the Knoll, would have been Harvey Henderson, because he hated Kennedy. The Kennedy actually reprimanded him, and Harvey Henderson was mysteriously gone for the detail in 1962. I don't know where he went.
Was
And
he
ended up
fired by JFK, in your opinion?
That's the mystery. There's no way to pin this down.
Wow.
You have agents admitting that he was racist, though. Walt Coughlin, Clint Hill, and others admitted that he was a racist agent, because Gerald Blaine tried to say he wasn't, that Harvey just was from Mississippi, and that's been all blown proportion. But his colleagues all said, no. That's one thing Abraham Bolden was correct about. He was as racist as could be. Harvey Henderson ended up in the Birmingham, Alabama office and was involved in the investigation of Martin Luther King. But back it up a little bit.
Yeah.
He would have been in a field office at the time. Could he have been the agent on the Knoll? Heck yeah, because all the other field office agents are accounted for. The White House detail agents are accounted for, but it's a field office in the South. There was only 300 agents in all of America in 1963. Could he have been one of the agents on the Knoll? Heck yeah. Abraham Bolden, for what it's worth, threw that name out to me. I didn't try to massage his memory. He volunteered it. Abraham Bolden said that Harvey Henderson, he would have the guts, the lunacy. If anybody would have been the Grassy Knoll agent, it'd be Harvey Henderson. That's a heck of a thing to allege. You know,
Who is, while we're on this thing, who is Thomas B. Shipman?
Oh, yeah. Well, Tom, I briefly cover it in here, and I cover it in a couple of my other books. It's literally too good to pass up.
It's so weird, Vince. Come on.
It's so bizarre. What it was he was one of the Secret Service drivers of Kennedy. And the Secret Service drivers of Kennedy were Morgan Guys, Sam Kinney, Bill Greer, and Thomas Shipman. Thomas Shipman was driving presidents since Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy. In fact, I have photos and films of Shipman driving Kennedy just in 1963 alone. In fact, he was there famously when Patrick Kennedy died in August 63. You see a lot of Thomas Shipman behind the wheel driving Kennedy.
He was the main driver for up until whatever happened.
It was between, to be fair, he was between him and Greer. Every time you'd see Greer, you'd see Shipman.
Right.
Well, and again, this only came out thanks to that same George McNally book, A Million Miles of Presidents. That talks about the Chicago threat in March of '63. Well, George McNally in his book, A Million Miles of Presidents, mentions the guy you just pictured, Thomas Shipman. It says Thomas Shipman wasn't President Kennedy's drivers, died suddenly. And the narration of his unnamed '63, I'm like, what? I never heard of this. It was 1999 when I'm reading this. Okay. Right. I couldn't believe what I'm reading. And it took a couple years, and I found out, oh my God, Thomas Shipman. He died October 14th, 1963, a month before the assassination, of a heart attack, an alleged heart attack at Camp David. And it took years to flesh out the story. Sam Kinney confirmed that, oh yeah, Tom Shipman, I found his body in one of the cabins up in Camp David. And he said, I think he was one of the only people that died at Camp David, to be honest with you. Well, the Secret Service didn't even acknowledge his death in a roll call of agents that died through the years. Out of thousands of agents that have come and go, I think it's only 37 or 39 who've ever died in the line of duty. He's the only one for the Kennedy era. And in 2001 on, all of a sudden, Thomas Shipman, could have been because of me, they started to mention him.
Oh, touche, my friend.
October 14th. Well, here's the thing. It's really crazy. For my third and fourth book, I contacted Thomas Shipman's family. I found them.
Wow.
Okay, they didn't want remuneration or fame or nothing. They wanted to be anonymous. They're still anonymous. And they said that Vince, to be honest with you, we always thought his death was bizarre. He just passed an annual physical. There was nothing wrong with him. We have no family history of heart disease. Heart attack is the country doctor catch-all. Okay, the guy wasn't stabbed or shot. Back in '63, can't see anything. No toxicology tests were given. He was buried 2 days later. And this gets crazy. This is Thomas Shipman's family telling me this. They said that Dr. Berkeley took care of everything. Yeah, my father was buried 2 days later. And I even said to myself, oh, God, toxicology tests could take weeks or months. Like that kid from One Direction who died took weeks for the
Vince
toxicology
is referring to
test
Dr. Admiral Berkeley.
Admiral Berkeley took care of everything. And the guy's buried 2 days later. And the crazy thing is, other than some local Maryland small newspapers, not the Baltimore Sun, local small newspapers mention his death, nothing's mentioned from Pierce Salinger, President Kennedy himself, or nothing. And yet 10 years later, another agent died for Nixon, and Nixon was all teary-eyed talking about Cliff Dietrich and Patricia,
he melted down.
And the daughter went to the funeral.
Yeah.
And yet 10 years before, an agent, Kennedy, was very compassionate, mentions nothing about him. He dies at Camp David. And this is another thing. The Shipman family told me they thought it was suspicious. He died of a heart attack at Camp David. He was buried quickly. Dr. Berger, they also said that he was looking forward to the Dallas trip because, get this, they
Wait,
had relatives.
did they tell you that they thought he was poisoned?
They had suspicions that she didn't want to go there. She
Oh,
basically
okay,
said
all right.
that I can't prove it. So if I can't prove it, I don't want to say it.
Right. Okay.
But the sound in her voice was like she was leaning that way, but she didn't want to be quoted. But I guess now I'm kind of spilling the beans because she kind of alluded to it. But she did say that they had family in Dallas, and she talked about all her family tree and this, that, and the other. And Thomas Shipman was looking forward to be on the Texas trip because he was looking forward to driving Kennedy. His last official trip was in late '63, Milford, PA, on the Mary Pinchot Meyer estate. He drove Kennedy there
for a rendezvous, Vince.
Maybe. And then in October '63, he's guarding Kennedy at Camp David. Yeah, I know. October 14, '63, he dies of a heart attack after passing an annual physical. And I can't stress this enough. Not only the Secret Service agents in general, but the agents who drove the president had to be fit as a fiddle, because if they have a heart attack or a medical condition, they're driving the president and other dignitaries, the first lady. Hello. This is great. Those guys got to be really in good shape. And there's no family history of heart disease or nothing. He just keels over at 51. I mean, come on, give me a freaking break at a camp. He's the only guy. I've never found anybody else who ever died at Camp David for what it's worth either.
Well, how about this guy? How about Captain Michael Groves? What about his story?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I mean, he was only 27, Vince.
Yeah, he was part of the honor guard for Kennedy's body at Arlington. Yeah, just a few days later after the assassination, after all the ceremony and everything, he dropped dead. He was only like, what was he, like 27, something like that?
Yeah.
He dropped dead. His head fell right into his food. He dies of a heart attack. That's a heck of, it's also in the book brief as a one paragraph mention, because in the context of Thomas Shipman and bizarre deaths, and the fact that, what did he know? Did he see the body? Did he hear things scuttlebutt? They want him out of the way. Think about Thomas Shipman. With Thomas Shipman out of the way, that gave Bill Greer the chance to drive Kennedy, because most of the time, Sam Kinney was the driver of the fob car. Most of the time, Morgan Guys was especially in charge of the garage detail.
Well, Kinney was your magic bullet guy, wasn't he, before that?
Yeah.
Didn't you tell me that? Then Kinney was your magic bullet connection.
Yeah, we'll get to that and hold that thought real quick. But so gave Greer the chance to drive Kennedy. My three suspects are Greer, Emory Robertson, Floyd Boring, as being the agents I think were sinisterly involved across the line. Greer obviously turned around twice, his foot on the foot off the gas and on the brakes, disobeyed a direct order from Roy Kellerman, common sense and training, and doesn't do anything until Kennedy's killed, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he came from Ireland, and this came out in 2013. The Irish Times, newspaper in Ireland, worked in conjunction with me. They contacted me out of nowhere. They said, I got some records you might be interested in, Vince. The Bill Greer and his family immigrated to, from Ireland to America when he was basically 18 going on 19. So I knew that already. What else you got to go? Well, he was part of the Orange Order, the Order of the Orange. As we know, Protestants and Catholics for generations have been at each other's throat, at least figuratively, not literally over there. Well, what this leads to is, as I backtrack, Bill Greer died in 1985. When I contacted his son, Richard, in 1991, I asked him what his father thought of Kennedy. He avoided the question, just got silent. So I went to other things. He was very cooperative. I went back to him again. Sir, if you don't mind, what did your father think of President Kennedy? He goes, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. In the context of Greer's actions and inactions, in the context of being the Order of the Orange, that statement looms large. Because why didn't Richard lie to a total stranger? Said, "Oh, he loved Kennedy." Maybe a pat answer is oh yeah, he loved Kennedy, and Kennedy loved him. Instead, he tells a total stranger on the phone, "Well, we're Methodists, and JFK was Catholic." He had disdain in his voice when he said it. Like, wow, is right. Oh, about Kinney, we talked about this last time. But when the book by Paul Landis came out in the fall, well, actually a year ago, and Paul Landis was like a bait and switch. Almost his entire book is about his Secret Service career. There's only a few pages about Dallas. Very, very disappointing. In fact, Paul Landis wrote 2 reports saying his shot came from the front, which he conveniently left out of his book. But he mentions finding the magic bullet, what became the magic bullet, on the back seat of the limousine, on the top of the back seat where Kennedy was. The thing is, he was interviewed in 2010 for Jerry Blaine's book, the Kennedy Detail, and the documentary. He appears on the National Geographic, Discovery Channel documentary. Never mentions anything about finding a bullet.
Nope.
He was interviewed in the late 80s for the 25th anniversary, and he never mentions finding a bullet. The closest he ever came was finding like Jackie's cigarette lighter. Oh, there is Michael Donald Groves. You found it. Very good. But here's what I think. I think Paul Landis was smelling money.
Yep.
He saw Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, his two colleagues from the Kennedy Detail documentary he was arm in arm with, making big money on their Simon & Schuster books. And he realized his book by itself would be like pretty boring. He didn't have that great a career. He guarded Jackie, but so did Clint Hill. And Clint Hill was with her even more because he was just another one of the agents of the First Aid Detail. Sam Kinney died in 1997. Sam Laux, the neighbor who claimed that Sam found the magic bullet, died. And right after he died, we get word that Paul Landis is coming out with a book. He's claiming he found the magic bullet, huh? And people have even noticed this, and I mentioned it as well, that Paul Landis' story is eerily similar to Sam or to
you
Robert
told me
Laux.
that. Yeah, you told me that.
The Laux is the neighbor of Kinney who claimed in 2013. Yeah, there's Landis with Hill.
Well, also the nurse died 6 months earlier.
Yes. Yeah,
right,
what was her name? Hall. What was her name?
Yeah, she died.
Patricia
also.
Hall.
Patricia
and she also
Hall,
claimed
that
to
really cleared it.
found a bullet there on the stretcher.
Yep.
They both died, but the thing about Laux, the neighbor, was really crazy. Is he died, and months later, Paul Landis comes to the book where he claims, I found a bullet, and it had to be the magic bullet. The thing that's so crazy is he doesn't even spell out for the layman the ramifications for that. I can see him at occasion say, okay, he found the so-called magic bullet. What does that mean?
Yeah.
But he also conveniently leaves out that he found he reported in 2 reports a shot came from the front. That's a heck of an omission there. But what happened, if you see reviews on Amazon, a lot of them are saying, boy, I thought there was going to be a lot more about this assassination. It's like 3 or 4 pages of assassination. The rest is about his life story. And they were very disappointed. It was a bait and switch. If you watch Fox News and CNN, all his interviews, it looked like, wow, this could be a blockbuster about the assassination.
Well, it's similar to Buell Wesley Fraser's book. There's really nothing there.
Except for one little detail.
At the
about
end.
The guy coming away from the knoll, walking away from the knoll with a rifle.
Yep.
May or may not.
That got him the book deal, Vince.
Yeah. Makes you think these guys throw something in just to make it tantalize or whatnot.
You think?
That's why I stick with facts. I mean, people even say, like, this latest book's 250 pages about the plot to kill Kennedy in Chicago. I could have padded and made it 500 pages of my speculation. Let's speculate and speculate. I don't like to do that. I want to just keep it to facts. Here's documents. There's things you can see, read, you can verify, as opposed to, well, Vince, what do you think about this? I'm going to write 50 pages of what I speculate this means. Right. I don't want to do that. I'd rather spell it out because, to me, the evidence speaks volumes. When you see these guys, you see these photos and documents, you say to yourself, my God.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, here's some facts. Facts. Hunley's got some super chats for us.
I got a few.
Okay, so let's roll. Stick with us, man. Stick with us.
Go ahead. You're good.
Stick with us.
All right. Well, Pamela has been a member for 20 months, and she's
I know her.
Some images.
Yeah.
She's a regular on here.
Yeah. I know her from Twitter.
Okay. Yeah. She's pinging quite a lot. Happy Tuesday, guys. Happy to see you, Vince. There you go.
There you go. From Twitter / the X. They call Twitter the X now. But I know her,
or Twit-X, or like Latinx, or
here you go.
Pew Pew 556 Pew Pew's out of Norway and gifts a lot of memberships to people. Has been really generous. Helps keep the channel going. And
great.
We have Al Gonzalez. This is not really on topic, Al, but was Trump's public rejection of Pompeo a clear signal the remaining of JFK files will be released forthwith, despite whoever pleads with them not to? Best events. Good question. I don't know. I hope that Trump does release the rest of the documents.
Yeah, Trump and Biden have done some valuable document dumps. I'll give them credit for that.
I keep saying that. That's what I keep saying.
Yeah, they did some valuable. Well, look at that. I wouldn't have had some of the documents in this book. For the 2017 one. In fact, Groubert and Bolden documents came out because of that 2017 document dump. They just happened to be ignored by the research community because, for all due respect, everyone's looking for CIA. Oh, Secret Service. I don't care about that. So that's why it got ignored. To answer the gentleman's question, will the rest be released? I don't think so. I don't think the CIA doesn't want them released.
Wow.
For whatever reason, I don't think they're ever going to see the light.
They're going to have to pass a new law to keep them not released, because otherwise each president is going to be in violation of the law and be sued by this group that represented Friends of Jim DiEugenio. these lawyers, Paul Blau and his group out of chokeholds.
Yeah, Jefferson Morley I spoke to last night.
Morley too, right?
Yeah, I spoke to him last night. He's part of it too. And
yeah,
in fact, one of the things I brought up, they're going to follow up on just very briefly is although the Haas Select Committee staff interviews were all released in the late 1990s thanks to the ARB, at least a few executive sessions were never released, including Jerry Bain of the White House Detail and Maurice Martineau. And how I know this is not only is it footnoted in the final report and some of the volumes real briefly, executive session testimony of Gerald Bain, executive session testimony of Maurice Martineau. Those gentlemen both admitted to me that they had executive session testimony apart from the staff interviews that have been released. And that's where Jerry Bain told me he was asked why the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. So
tell him who Martineau is, by the way.
Maurice Martineau was the head of the Chicago office. He used to be a White House detail agent from FDR to Eisenhower.
Yeah.
But he was Abraham Bolden's boss in the Chicago office. I lead off the book with it. He told me in 1993 he believed there was a conspiracy. In fact, he said the House Select Committee was a lot more valuable than the Warren Commission. And he wouldn't go into any details of his belief in a conspiracy, but again, it wasn't a conspiracy theorist or some guy writing a book. Here was a guy who was in the Secret Service, who was Abraham Bolden's boss, who was not a fan of Bolden, to put it mildly, who was telling me there was a conspiracy. Adds more luster to the fact of the plot to kill President Kennedy. What did he know? Because obviously Abraham Bolden's alleging that Maurice Martineau knew damn well about a plot to kill Kennedy in Chicago, and it was covered up, and not to send the reports, and don't send through telex, don't put names and file numbers and all this stuff. So it's grist for the mill. Yeah, Maurice Martineau was something else. But even though the staff interviews are tantalizing, he admits that there was a prior threat in the prior Chicago trip. When he's asked about the November 2nd trip, the staff says that he visibly stiffened. Is just, I can't remember anything right at this moment. And the staff interjected their opinion that compared to his prior statements, it seemed like he was withholding information, like there's something about his demeanor changed. But when I spoke to him, thank God I did, because he died a few years. That's another thing too. Thank God I spoke to some of these guys in the 1990s.
Yeah. Oh,
so
definitely.
many of them passed away, and
you got them right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you have them recorded by chance?
Oh yeah, I got several of them. They were donated to the Assassination Records Review Board. I got Sam Kinney, Abraham Bolden, obviously he consented, no big deal. Gerald Bain, I have Don Lawton, I have Ron Pontius, Charles Zabor, I have Don Lawton, John Norris. They're all donated to National Archives. They're duly noted in the final report of the Assassination Records Review Board, and some of the clips are on my YouTube channel. You go to my YouTube channel, you'll see one of my playlists, Secret Service Vince, and you'll see like, oh, son of a gun, interview with Gerald Bain. You can actually hear them speaking. And actually, for context, what I did is I was lucky some of these gentlemen spoke on TV and radio and whatnot. So I juxtaposed Gerald Bain, believe it or not, was on TV twice. What's My Line and Truth or Consequences. Yeah. So you can see and hear his voice. And then right after I put the little clip of me speaking to him, so you can compare, oh, that's definitely Gerald Bain. Listen to that voice. And
why did LBJ tell Rowley to stop the investigation and turn everything over to the FBI?
Why, indeed. I think it's because the Secret Service was making headway and some of the other agents were making headway. The course was set that LBJ and Hoover wanted to say, this was Oswald, let's get over with it. The election's coming up. The Vietnam War is looming. We have other fish to fry. Can't bring Kennedy back. Obviously, there's people who take a more sinister view and think these guys were conspirators. I mean, may or may not.
I'll tell you something bizarre. I mean, we're doing a whole Watergate series now. That's why I was interested in Sims. One of the things Nixon wrote about was when he became president, for the first time, he got a call the next day from Hoover saying he was sending over a guy, or the Secret Service was sending over a guy to put in security. And that was Rowley, who came to Nixon's residence and installed cameras and recording devices in Nixon's own residence. Nixon was not happy about it.
Yeah, and just like, the Secret Service had, installed audio listening devices for JFK and LBJ, those same men were still in power, and they're responsible for the Watergate tapes. It was Robert Bob, it was James Rowley, it was Louis Sims, it was Al Wong.
Wong.
It was other people part of the intelligence division who was still in the intelligence division. James Mastervito and Glenn Bennett, they were in the intelligence division. So these strange connections between, the LBJ and Nixon days and Nixon's downfall, and even for these guys guarded Ford, when that woman Sarah Jane Moore took the pot shot at Ford, one of the agents who helped him get down was Ron Pontius, who was on the Texas trip. The connections are just crazy everywhere.
Crazy, bro.
So,
all right, Hunley, what do you got over there? Anything?
Yeah, okay. Big Bill 767 said, Vince, got your book 2 weeks ago. It's great show, guys. And like I said earlier, there is a link to his book in the description.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Definitely check it out. And it also helps the show too. We get a little kickback too if you guys buy through our link. So
like I always tell people, I work for a living. I'm married, and I have other interests. So this is a big interest of mine. I'm not like Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine and Posner and Bugliosi and Bellin, who are making a King's Ransom, Norman Mailer. It's funny, all the lone nutters are making the King's Ransom. The rest of us are just working for a living, working stiffs who have regular jobs and doing this out of labor love. I'm not in this for the money, baby. I'm not at all. So I appreciate anytime somebody gives me a compliment, I'm very happy, and I duly note any criticism too. But I'm not. This is a labor of truth. It isn't about how much money can I rake in when you consider Clint Hill. Oh, by the way, there's gonna be a movie about Clint Hill's life. I don't know if you guys know about this.
Oh no,
you know about this? Supposedly it's in the works and tentatively coming out next year. It's Agent 9. Clint Hill is the title of it. They were originally we talked about this in a previous show that I scuttled the Kennedy Detail movie. I don't know if you know there's gonna be a Hollywood movie. Jake Gyllenhaal's dad, Steven, is a director, and there's a big Hollywood movie. The Life of Pi animators were going to be involved. They were going to have all this AI. I got wind of the script from a lady from the Philippines. I don't know how she knew, but she knows Steven Gyllenhaal. And some of the dialogue in the script was going to be Kennedy braiding the agents. I don't want any of these agents on the back of my car. They were going to blame Kennedy in the movie. Well, I presented counter evidence to Steven. The movie's scuttled. A week later, the very fancy website's gone. The movie's going to go on Internet Movie Database. It's in production for 10 years. It's shuttled. And I was told by several people that Gerald Blaine and his wife were irate at me for contacting the director. I scuttled this Hollywood bullcrap movie that was going to blame Kennedy. It was basically the whole movie thrust was going to be, I don't want these Ivy League charlatans on the back of my car. And that's why he was killed. They were going to blame Oswald and Kennedy for wearing the names of the car. That was going to be a whole Hollywood movie. Can you imagine the historical damage that would do? You know how many naive people would believe that? Hey, Vince, I saw this movie, and it's a JFK didn't want those agents on the back of the car. I scuttled it.
They tried it with Parkland. Remember the Parkland movie?
Well, we have it right now, Vince. I mean, I want to address it now. Mark's like, I don't want to talk about it, but there's a new Chauncey Holt thing that's out now, a documentary, and I've got so many emails, DMs, comments. Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Like, number one, he's not a tramp, and I don't need to go any further. But it's just like they're out there. Question for Vince from Pirate Ken here. In your opinion, was JFK a guaranteed dead man when it was determined he would enter Texas on November 22nd and not leave under any circumstances?
The short answer would be yes, but if they would have had the normal security, no, he would have survived Dallas. But the short answer is yes. I think Chicago and Tampa, the canceled Chicago trip November 2nd, which is the book was about, in 4 days before Miami/Tampa. Those were the dry runs, didn't succeed. Texas was going to be it. Dallas was too good. Dallas was too good because it would frame LBJ. Whether people believe LBJ was involved or not, it framed him. My God, the vice president's in his home state, Texas. Everything's wrapped up perfect. We got a guy who was in the Marines who defected in Russia. We could just sew this all up. People were going to be afraid of another Cuban Missile Crisis, World War III. Let's just tie us up in a bow. It was this nut. It was a commie, a red. We got to do this now because if he gets to Austin, the LBJ Ranch can't do it there. And then hold
on, because a lot of people said they could have done it, and that was a plan later at the LBJ Ranch if Dealey Plaza had failed. But go on.
Oh no, you know what? Actually, Mark,
you know that.
Point. You know what? I got to admit, there's one guy that actually said it to me. Marty Underwood in 1992, Democratic National Convention man, said that when
he was selling tickets, he was selling tickets to the event.
Yeah, and he said that Sam Giancana told him if Kennedy's number was on the board, if they didn't get him in Dallas, they were going to get him at the LBJ Ranch the next day. So I mean, that's out there. I'm not a big believer in the mafia did it. But
no, either am I. But there are other sources other than Underwood.
Yeah,
for that
it's definitely
theory.
grist for the mill. Yeah, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, right on schedule. Any opinion about the recent documentary of the deathbed confession of Chauncey Marvin Holt, the alleged tramp and CIA asset with mob ties that identified Harrelson and Richard Montoya?
See, the thing about that, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, crush their hopes and dreams about these things, but back in 1992, 91, 92, it came out, and it was what, Doyle and Abrams and the other
we've already
ones.
been down this. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, the tramps for the president. Even Oliver
I know,
Stone
Vince.
admitted if he'd have it to do all over again, he would have excised. It was too late. It was in production. And in
We've
the
done
audio
this.
commentary of the JFK movie, Oliver Stone admits, I'm satisfied they were tramps. When you see the actual tramps, I mean, they were the tramps. It was tantalizing because one image looked like Charles Harrelson. One image looked like E. Howard Hunt. If you look at them all in total, it's Doyle, Abrams, and I forget the other guy's name now. But they were tramps. Yeah. So.
And Cedric Walker said, Fresh and Fit YouTube channel does what y'all do. I've met Walter, and I forgot the other guy from Fresh and Fit when I visited Tim Pool. And they mentioned being into JFK. So, yep, I've heard about that. I don't know if they agree on everything. I don't know where they are on it. I know that they were interested in what we're doing. But, yeah, that's actually it on Super Chats. Now, typically what we do is we head over to locals and
if you got any other
hang
questions
out with the people here.
Yeah, they'll have some over there, Vince. It's a different, it's the members on locals.
Yeah, it's kind of like our inside crowd. And really quickly before we go, those who want to continue watching, it's on structure.locals.com. It's free to become a member. And if you decide, hey, I really like it, you want to be a paid supporter, right now, all 5 parts of Mark's script on Lee Harvey Oswald, which was executive produced by Oliver Stone himself, are available. It is an audio drama. It's taken a year to finish this whole thing out. It's been a very, very long
well, it's taken a year to do the audio. It took me 3 years to write the actual script. And speaking of which, next Tuesday, we're going to have the legendary Robert Groden here where Vince is, and Robert's going to bring on some home movies from JFK and some other visual material that's never been seen before.
Excellent.
To sandwich the 22nd with Vince and Robert Groden.
Right. Right before we go, Pinochet's helicopter tour said, Vince, has any content been taken down by YouTube on your channel?
Yes, I had a couple of videos taken down due to copyright concerns. I also had quite a few that were age restricted. One thing I want to mention, the context of that, something would have been lost forever to history if I didn't burn it, rip it, so to speak, off YouTube. I'll make this very brief. It's in the book. I mentioned it earlier. Back in 2020, during the COVID lockdown, this guy, I forget his name right now, he had this amazing channel of historical videos of ABC, CBS, and NBC. He had hundreds of videos. His channel was all taken down. Might have been due to copyright concerns. Thank God I ripped, because I got Wally Weston on there. I got so many people talking about the connection between Oswald and Ruby. I got all this on my YouTube channel. I saved it on disc as well. And one of the things I have is Ron Gardner of ABC telling the world that normally building rooftops are guarded for presidents. They've been for many years. How something like this could happen, I can't understand. He talks about it. It's on video. And again, I got this on my YouTube channel. Thank God I burned this, because it was gone. So even though I wasn't much of a victim as some other people, that would have been gone forever. I didn't know this guy from Adam. His channel was wiped out. It was nowhere else. And thank God I did it, because just a few months later when I visited the site, I was like, the whole site's gone. And some I saved in when I went to the bookmark, it said, due to copyright violations, blah, 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 his video was removed. Like, I was thinking his whole channel, thank God I ripped it, because I got Dan Rather sitting there with Wally Weston and other people talking about the connection of Oswald and Ruby. It's all on my YouTube channel. I do a ABC compilation.
We've got to talk about, especially what was ripped down. I want to see it. You may want to put things up on Rumble too, just in case, because they're better on some of the copyright stuff. But cool. All right, well, let's continue this conversation over on locals. There's some questions and things like that there. And everybody on YouTube, I hope you consider coming over. Same with Rumble, X, everybody. See you over there.